The desert night pressed down on Claire like a cold iron weight. Stars pierced the darkness above sharp as Apache arrows, the old-timers would say while beneath her boots. The sand had already given up the day's warmth. She pulled her father's worn map from her saddlebag. Though reading it by starlight was near impossible, the creases had worn thin from folding and unfolding, much like her hope of finding Eli. 3 months. 3 months since her brother had vanished after that train robbery near Tucson. The newspapers painted him as an outlaw, but Claire knew better. Eli couldn't rob a henhouse without feeling guilty, let alone a Southern Pacific freight car. No. This had Cyrus Edison's fingerprints all over it, the same man who'd tried to buy their father's water rights to Coyote Springs before the old man died. A desert owl called somewhere in the darkness. And Claire's hand instinctively found the grip of her father's Navy Colt. The revolver was older than she was, its bluing worn silver at the edges, but it had never failed to fire. She'd practiced with it behind their ranch house until she could hit a tin can at 30 paces, though she prayed she'd never need to use it on anything that breathed. The wind shifted, bringing the sweet scent of sage mixed with something else, leather and smoke, human scents. Claire froze, her mare Victoria sensing the tension and stopping mid-step. "Easy, girl," she whispered, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. The shadow separated from the rock so smoothly she almost missed it. One moment there was only stone and starlight. The next, a man stood 20 feet away. Even in the darkness, she could make out his silhouette, tall, lean, moving with the kind of grace that came from a lifetime of navigating dangerous ground. "You're a long way from any town," he said, his voice carrying that particular cadence she'd heard from the Apache scouts, who sometimes traded at Fort Grant. English, but shaped by another tongue. Claire kept her hand on the Colt, but didn't draw. "Could say the same about you." He stepped closer, just enough for starlight to catch the planes of his face. Strong features, eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, hair bound back with a strip of cloth. He wore a mix of traditional and adopted clothing, leather leggings, but a cotton shirt, moccasins, but also a cavalry scout's neckerchief, though she'd bet her last dollar he wasn't working for the army anymore. "The desert at night is no place for a woman alone," he said. "Good thing I'm not just any woman." She let some steel creep into her voice. "I know where I'm going." "Do you?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because the way you're headed leads to Skeleton Canyon. Flash floods killed 3 prospectors there last summer. The rocks still smell of death." Claire's jaw tightened. She'd planned to cut through that canyon to save half a day's ride. "Then I'll go around?" "Longer path, more exposed. Edison's men patrol the southern route." At the mention of Edison, her eyes sharpened. "You know Edison?" "Every Apache knows the man who poisons wells to steal water." His voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Every creature in this desert knows." They circled each other slowly, neither quite trusting, both recognizing a kindred wariness. Claire noticed how he kept his hand near but not on the knife at his belt, ready but not threatening. She matched his caution with her own. "My name is Claire," she offered finally. "Claire Franklin." He considered this for a long moment. "I am called Samuel, though my grandmother knows me by another name." Samuel. It seemed both fitting and not a Christian name worn like armor in a world that demanded such compromises. She wondered what his grandmother called him when no white ears were listening. A distant crack echoed across the desert, unmistakably a rifle shot. Both their heads turned toward the sound. More shots followed, rapid and chaotic. Not hunting, fighting. "Edison's men," Samuel said grimly. "They've been pushing harder lately, testing boundaries." "Boundaries of what?" "Sacred springs, treaty lands, places they have no right to be." He looked back at her. "Why do you seek Edison?" Claire hesitated, then decided on truth, or part of it. "He framed my brother for that train robbery. I need to find Eli before they hang him for something he didn't do." Samuel studied her face in the starlight. "And you think to do this alone with one old pistol and determination?" It's worked so far. Has it? He gestured to the darkness around them. You didn't know I was here until I chose to show myself. Edison's men are not so courteous. Pride warred with pragmatism in Claire's chest. She needed to find Eli, but charging blind into Edison's territory would help no one. Then what do you suggest? Before he could answer, the wind changed again. This time it brought the rumble of distant thunder, though no clouds blocked the stars above. Samuel's expression shifted to one of concern. Flash flood, he said urgently. From the mountains. We need higher ground. Now! Claire wanted to argue, to demand how he could know such a thing from just a sound. But something in his certainty moved her. She grabbed Victoria's reins and followed as he led them up a steep path between the rocks. They climbed quickly but carefully, the sounds of their movement masked by the growing rumble. As they reached a narrow ledge, Claire looked back and gasped. Water rushed through the valley below, a violent, churning mass carrying debris and death. The flood filled the exact path she'd planned to take. The canyon channels it, Samuel explained, not even breathing hard from their climb. My grandmother taught me to read the signs. The mountains speak if you know how to listen. They stood there on the ledge, pressed back against the rock face, watching nature's violence remake the landscape below. The forced proximity made Claire acutely aware of him, the controlled strength in his movements. The way he'd positioned himself slightly forward as if to shield her from any debris the flood might fling upward. Thank you, she said when the worst had passed. He nodded, still watching the water. The desert takes the careless. Edison counts on this. What do you mean? Men who disappear in flash floods require no explanation, no investigation. His profile was hard as granite in the starlight. Your brother is not the first Edison has used and discarded. Claire's hands clenched. Then you know something about what happened. I know Edison needed someone to blame for stealing army weapons. Someone expendable. Someone whose sister would be too afraid or too dead to ask questions. The implication chilled her more than the night air. He's expecting me. Perhaps, or perhaps he simply doesn't care. One more skeleton in the desert makes no difference to such men. They waited on the ledge as the flood slowly subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape of mud and scattered stones. The forced closeness had shifted something between them, not quite trust, but a recognition of shared purpose. There's another way to Coyote Springs, Samuel said finally. Harder but hidden. I could show you. Why would you help me? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. Because Edison took something from my people too. And because... He paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. Because the desert has enough bones. Claire made her decision. All right, but we do this as equals. I'm not some Eastern lady who needs protecting. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I would not mistake you for such. You carry your father's gun like someone who knows its weight. She blinked, surprised. How did you know it was my father's? The way you touch it, like memory, not just metal. He began picking his way down from the ledge. Come, we have distance to cover before dawn. As they descended, Claire found herself trusting his footstep choices, noting how he tested each hold before committing his weight. This was a man who'd learned survival the hard way, through necessity rather than choice. They retrieved Victoria, who had wisely scrambled to higher ground on her own, and began walking. Samuel led them through a landscape that seemed featureless to Claire, but which he navigated like a man reading street signs. Tell me about your brother, he said after an hour of silence. Eli's young, 22, always dreaming of adventure, but... She shook her head. He's gentle. Reads too much. Wanted to be a teacher before father died and the ranch started failing. And Edison offered him work. Promise of it. Said he needed educated men for his expansion plans. Eli thought he could earn enough to save the ranch. Her voice turned bitter. Instead, he vanished, and suddenly the newspapers are saying he robbed a train. Samuel nodded slowly. Edison's pattern. Use the desperate. Discard them when convenient. Thunder rumbled again. Closer this time. Real thunder, with a flicker of lightning on the horizon. The air smelled of coming rain. "We'll need shelter," Samuel said, scanning the rocks. "They're a shallow cave. It will do." The cave was little more than an overhang, but it cut the rising wind. They crowded in with Victoria, the space forcing them closer than propriety would normally allow. Claire tried not to think about the warmth radiating from Samuel's presence, the way his breathing had steadied to match the rhythm of the desert night. "Your people," she said quietly. "Are they near Coyote Springs?" "Near enough. Edison wants the water. He speaks of progress, of bringing civilization. But civilization to him means our absence. And the law." Samuel's laugh was short and humorless. "The law wears a badge bought with Edison's silver. Justice and law parted ways in these lands long ago." Lightning illuminated the desert in stark relief, showing the harsh beauty of the landscape and something else. Fresh boot prints in a wash below, heading toward the eastern mountains. Many boots, military issue from the tread pattern. "Edison's hired guns," Samuel confirmed, following her gaze. "Moving at night means they don't want witnesses." "Moving where?" "Toward my people's summer camp, perhaps. Or to poison another well. They've done both before." The rage in his voice was controlled but present, like a banked fire ready to flare. Claire understood that kind of anger, the slow burn of watching injustice parade as progress. "Then we stop them," she said. He turned to look at her fully, something shifting in his expression. "You're helping me find my brother. I help you protect your people. Fair trade." "You would stand against Edison's men for people not your own." "I'd stand against Edison because it's right. The rest is just detail." They stared at each other in the lightning-flickered darkness, and Claire felt something pass between them, an understanding deeper than words. Here in this shallow cave, with a storm beginning to break overhead, they were no longer strangers but allies bound by necessity and perhaps something more. Samuel reached into his pouch and pulled out something pemmican, she realized, as he offered half to her. "Eat. Tomorrow we'll need strength." The dried meat and berries were tough but satisfying. They ate in companionable silence while the storm spent its fury outside. Claire found herself studying him in the intermittent lightning, the careful way he moved, the alertness that never quite faded even in rest. "What did your grandmother call you?" she asked suddenly. "Your real name?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "Nantan. It means spokesperson, or one who speaks for others." She said I would need to walk between worlds. "Nantan," Claire repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. "It suits you better than Samuel." "Perhaps, but Samuel is who I must be in your world." "Not with me," she said firmly. "With me, be who you are." The look he gave her then was unreadable, but she thought she saw surprise there, and maybe something warmer. The storm was passing, leaving behind the clean scent of wet sage and the promise of a difficult dawn. They would need to move soon, to use the cover of rain-washed tracks in the confusion of the storm's aftermath. But for now, they sat in their small shelter, two unlikely allies united against a common enemy, while the desert remade itself around them and the stars slowly returned to the clearing sky. The morning came too soon, bringing with it a choice that would haunt Claire for days to come. The narrow canyon ahead promised a shortcut to Coyote Springs, but the previous night's storm had transformed it into a death trap. Water still rushed through the lower passages, carrying debris and the occasional bloated carcass of some unlucky creature. "We go up," Nantan said, studying the canyon walls. "There's a ledge path. Dangerous, but passable." Claire looked up at the route. He indicated a series of narrow shelves and handholds that seemed designed to test one's commitment to living. Victoria can't make that climb. No, we'll have to leave her here, come back for her later. The thought of abandoning her horse, even temporarily, made Claire's chest tight. Victoria had been her father's mare before she was hers, but the alternative was losing more precious time, and Eli couldn't afford delays. She secured Victoria in a sheltered spot with enough vegetation and rainwater pooled in the rocks to last a day. "I'll be back for you, girl. Promise." The climb was worse than it looked. The rain had made everything slick, and more than once, Claire felt her boots skid on the wet stone. Nantan climbed just ahead, testing each hold before moving on, occasionally reaching back to guide her hand to a secure grip. Halfway up, her foot slipped completely. For one terrifying moment, she dangled by her fingertips, legs kicking at empty air. Then Nantan's hand clamped around her wrist, strong and sure, hauling her up to the ledge where he'd braced himself. They pressed against the rock face, breathing hard, her body trapped between the cliff and his solid presence. His hand still gripped her wrist, and she could feel his heartbeat where their chests touched, rapid but controlled, unlike her own panicked hammering. "You're all right," he said quietly, his breath warm against her temple. "I have you." Claire closed her eyes, fighting the dual urge to cling to him and push away. The fear of falling warred with a different kind of vertigo, one that had nothing to do with height. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her forget the deadly drop below. "We should keep moving," she managed. He nodded, but didn't immediately release her wrist. "Next time, tell me if you're struggling. Pride makes for poor climbing companions." They continued up, Claire forcing herself to focus on each handhold rather than the lingering warmth where he'd touched her. By the time they reached the canyon's rim, the sun was fully up, painting the desert in shades of gold and rust. From this height, they could see for miles. Nantan pointed to a dust cloud moving south. "Edison's men, heading away from us, fortunately." Claire collapsed on a flat rock, legs trembling from the climb. "How do you do that move like the rocks are part of you?" "Because they are." He settled beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "This land shaped my people as much as we shaped it. Edison thinks he can own it, fence it, drain it dry, but you cannot own the sunrise or cage the wind." She pulled her father's journal from her pack, grateful she'd wrapped it in oilcloth against the rain. The pages were filled with his careful notes about water rights, land claims, and increasingly frantic observations about Edison's growing power. "My father wrote about your people," she said, showing him a passage. "Called them the true custodians of Coyote Springs. Said the water stayed pure because they understood its worth." Nantan read silently, his expression softening. "Thomas Franklin. I remember him. He came to our ceremonies sometimes. Respectful, unusual for a white rancher. He wasn't always ranching. Started as a surveyor for the railroad, but quit when he saw what they were planning. Said he couldn't be part of destroying something that had existed since before memory. And Edison hated him for it. Among other reasons." Claire traced a finger over her father's final entry. "Dad opposed him at every town council. Voted against the railway expansion, the new mining claims. Edison needed him gone." "So he was." The blunt words hit like cold water. "The doctor said it was heart failure. Many things can cause a heart to fail. Fear, shock, certain plants known to those who study such things." Nantan's voice was carefully neutral. "I do not accuse. I simply observe." Claire felt her hands clench. Another score to settle with Edison, as if Eli wasn't enough. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think rather than rage. "Tell me about Coyote Springs," she said. Nantan was quiet for a moment, gathering words. "It's more than water. It's a gathering place, sacred, where the first people learned to speak with the spirits of the land. The springs never run dry because they're fed from deep beneath, from the heart of the earth itself. And Edison wants to drain it for his cattle empire. Cattle, mining, the new settlements he plans to build, he sees water as currency, not life. Nantan stood, scanning the horizon. We should move. The heat will build soon. They descended the far side of the canyon by an easier route. Claire trying not to notice how naturally they'd fallen into a rhythm, him leading but always aware of her pace, her trusting his choices without question. It felt dangerously like partnership. By midday, they reached a cluster of ancient cottonwoods marking a hidden spring. Nantan called out something in Apache before approaching, and Claire realized this must be a regular stopping place for his people. "Drink," he said, gesturing to the small pool. "The water here is good." She cupped the cool water gratefully, washing the dust from her face and throat. When she looked up, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" "You drink like someone who understands thirst," he said, "not like the town women who sip from crystal glasses." "I've known drought years, known what it means when the wells start failing." She sat back on her heels. "Is that why you're helping me? Because I'm Thomas Franklin's daughter?" "Partly." He knelt beside her at the pool, and she caught his reflection next to hers in the water. "Also because you climbed that canyon without complaining. Because you spoke of stopping Edison's men like you meant it. Because—" He paused, seeming to choose words carefully. "Because you look at me and see a man, not a savage to be feared or a noble curiosity to be studied." The honesty of it made her chest tight. "How do you know what I see?" "Your hand on your gun when we met, cautious but not terrified. Your questions practical, not about feathers or war paint or other foolishness town people ask. You see threats and allies, not categories." Claire found herself leaning closer, drawn by something deeper than logic. The space between them hummed with possibility and danger. Then a hawk cried overhead, breaking the moment, and they both pulled back. That night, they made camp in a grove of mesquite trees. Nantan had shown her how to build a fire that gave heat without much smoke, how to arrange the stones to hide the light. They shared the last of his pemmican and some hardtack from Claire's supplies. "Tomorrow we'll reach the edge of Edison's claimed territory," he said. "After that, every step is dangerous. As opposed to the paradise of safety we've enjoyed so far." He almost smiled at that. Fair point. Claire found herself studying him in the firelight, the sharp planes of his face, the careful grace of his movements, the way he seemed always aware of their surroundings, even in conversation. She'd known men who wore their strength like armor, aggressive and showy. Nantan's strength was like the desert itself, quiet until it needed to be otherwise. "Tell me about your family," she said. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died. Cavalry raid when I was young." His voice held old pain worn smooth by time. "She taught me the old ways, but also insisted I learn English. Spanish, said I would need many tongues for the world coming. Wise woman." "She is. You would like her. She has your way of seeing through to the bone of things." He fed another stick to the fire. "What will you do when you find your brother?" The question she'd been avoiding. "Get him somewhere safe. California. Maybe somewhere Edison's reach doesn't extend." "And will you go too?" Claire stared into the flames. "I don't know. The ranch is all I have left of my father, but without water rights, it's dying anyway. Maybe I'm just postponing the inevitable." "Nothing is inevitable except death. Everything else we choose." She looked up to find him watching her intently. "Even this," the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Especially this." His voice had gone low, rough. "Whatever this is becoming between us, we choose it or we don't. But choosing has consequences. For my people, for yours." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I know what the town would say, what they already say about white women who associate with Apache men. And I've never much cared what the town says about anything." She met his gaze steadily. "But I won't be another tragedy for your people either. Another excuse for Edison to stir hatred." You think that's what you would be a tragedy? I think... Claire paused, trying to find words for the complexity of it. I think we're both walking edges sharper than any canyon wall. One false step hurts more than just us. Nantan nodded slowly. My grandmother would say you have an old spirit, one that's walked many paths. He stood, checking the stars. You should sleep. Tomorrow. A gunshot cracked through the night, cutting him off. Then another, not aimed at them, too distant but deliberate. A signal. Nantan doused the fire instantly with dirt he'd kept ready. In the sudden darkness, Claire felt rather than saw him crouch beside her. Edison's men, he whispered. Signaling positions. They're surrounding something. Or someone. More shots. Organized now. 3. Pause. 2. Pause. 3 again. Claire's blood chilled as she recognized the pattern. That's Army signal code, she breathed. Quarry located. Closing in. You can read it. My father taught me. Said a woman alone should know all the languages men use to hunt. She listened to the next sequence. They're converging on something northwest of here, maybe 3 miles. Nantan cursed softly in Apache. That's near Crow Ridge Spring. Some of my people camped there when moving between seasonal grounds. Without discussion, they began moving. The moon had risen enough to light their way, and Nantan led them at a steady trot through terrain that would have been treacherous in full daylight. Claire pushed aside her exhaustion, focused only on keeping pace. They heard the confrontation before they saw it. Shouts in English, responses in Apache, the whinny of frightened horses. Nantan led them up a rocky slope that overlooked a small box canyon. Below, lit by torches and lanterns, a scene of barely controlled chaos unfolded. A family group of Apache, 2 women, an elder, and 3 children stood surrounded by a dozen armed riders. The eldest woman held herself with fierce dignity despite a rifle aimed at her chest. Claire recognized the lead rider, Luther Grant, Edison's foreman and enforcer. Told you people before. Grant was saying, "This is Edison property now. You're trespassing." The elder responded in Apache, his voice steady despite his age. One of the children, a girl of maybe 12, translated, "He says we have camped at this spring since before your grandfather was born. The paper in your pocket does not change the stones or the water." Grant spat tobacco juice dangerously close to the elder's feet. "Paper's all that matters in civilization. Old man, now you got 10 minutes to clear out, or we'll—" He never finished the threat. Nantan's thrown knife knocked the rifle from his hands, sending it spinning into the darkness. Before the riders could react, Claire had her Colt drawn and cocked. "Gentlemen," she called out, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I believe you're lost. This is treaty land." Grant whirled toward her voice, then checked himself as he registered the gun. "Miss Franklin, what in hell are you doing out here?" "I could ask you the same. Mr. Grant, last I checked, harassment of peaceful families wasn't in your job description." "These ain't families. They're Apache." He said it like it explained everything. "And you're keeping dangerous company if that knife thrower's with you." Nantan materialized from the shadows to Grant's left, another blade ready. "The only danger here is you. Leave, now!" The riders shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons but not quite committing. They'd expected easy prey, not armed resistance from 2 sides. Grant's face flushed even in the torchlight. "You think Edison's gonna let this slide, a white woman throwing in with hostiles?" "I think," Claire said evenly, "that Edison has bigger problems than my social choices, like explaining why his men are violating federal treaty law. Unless you'd prefer I make my report directly to Fort Huachuca." It was a bluff. The fort was days away and unlikely to care about one incident, but Grant didn't know that. He gathered his wounded pride like armor. "This ain't over," he promised. "Not by half." But he gestured to his men, and they began backing away. One retrieved Grant's rifle, and soon the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. The Apache family remained still until Nantan called out in their language. Then the elder responded, and Claire could see tension drain from their postures. The girl who'd translated approached them shyly. "Grandmother asks if you are the woman who drinks water properly, the one who sees clearly." Claire blinked, glancing at Nantan. How could she know that? He actually smiled then, full and genuine. "Desert has its own telegraph, faster than any wire." The grandmother approached, studying Claire with eyes that seemed to see through to her soul. She spoke at length to Nantan, who translated, "She says you carry your father's spirit but walk your own path. She says the water recognizes you. She says—" He paused, seeming embarrassed. "She says I am a fool if I don't see what the stars are writing." Claire felt heat flood her cheeks, grateful for the darkness. "Tell her thank you for the kind words." More exchange in Apache. Then the girl piped up, "Grandmother says words are smoke. Come share our fire and food. That is real." Despite the danger of lingering, they spent an hour with the family. Claire learned the girl's name was Maria. Many Apache had taken Spanish or American names for dealing with outsiders. She watched Nantan with his people, saw how the children gravitated to him, how the women trusted him implicitly, how the elder consulted him as an equal despite the age difference. This was who he was beneath the careful control he showed the world. This warmth, this connection to community. It made something ache in her chest, a loneliness she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. When they finally left, laden with gifts of dried meat and corn cakes despite their protests, the grandmother caught Claire's arm. She pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch, and spoke directly to her for the first time in accented English. For the choosing time, when the heart and the head must speak as one. Claire tucked the pouch away, unsure what it contained but moved by the gesture. As they walked back into the desert night, she found herself unconsciously matching Nantan's stride. "Your people will be in danger now," she said. "Grant won't forget the humiliation." They were already in danger. Now at least Edison knows someone is watching, someone who speaks his language of threats and paper. "Is that what I am, a translator?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You are—" he started, then shook his head. "I don't have words in any language for what you are becoming to me." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. In her exhaustion and the emotional aftermath of confrontation, her defenses crumbled. She reached up, fingertips barely grazing his jaw, feeling the day's stubble and the warmth of skin. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Yes." He caught her hand but didn't pull it away. "Many things are dangerous. Speaking truth, standing for justice, caring for someone you should not care for." "Should not? My people need me focused. Yours already shun you for your independence. Together we make targets of each other." Claire stepped closer, drawn by honesty and moonlight and something deeper than reason. "I've been a target since I put on my father's gun. At least now I'm not alone." He made a sound somewhere between laugh and sigh. "You undo my resolve. Claire Franklin." "Good." She pulled her hand back, but slowly. "Your resolve was making me doubt mine." They stood there in the desert darkness, desire and duty warring in the space between them. Finally, Nantan stepped back. The grandmother was right. There will be a choosing time, but not tonight. His voice had gone rough. Tonight we need rest and clear heads. Tomorrow we enter the heart of Edison's territory. Claire nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against more than the night chill. As they made their way back to their cold camp, she found herself touching the pouch the grandmother had given her. Whatever came next, she had the feeling she would need all the wisdom the desert people could share. The stars watched their progress, writing their own stories across the vast darkness, while somewhere ahead, Coyote Springs waited with its pure water and its secrets. The town of Calico Wells squatted on the desert like a festering sore, all dust and disappointment under the brutal afternoon sun. Claire pulled her hat low as they entered from the north, aware of how she must look trail-worn, dusty, walking beside an Apache man as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The stares started immediately. A woman sweeping her storefront stopped mid-motion. Two men playing cards outside the barbershop forgot their game. Even the mongrel dogs seemed to pause in their eternal search for shade and scraps. "Keep walking," Nantan murmured. "Show no weakness." They'd retrieved Victoria that morning, the mare whinnying with relief at Claire's return. Now she led the horse down Main Street, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The weight of her father's colt on her hip was reassuring, but she knew a gun was no defense against the kind of danger that came from wagging tongues and poisoned minds. Deputy Benjamin Pike emerged from the sheriff's office like a bad omen, his star glinting in the harsh light. Pike had mean eyes and a mustache he waxed to points, as if trying to add menace to his weasel-like face. He'd been Edison's creature for years. Everyone knew it, but nobody said it where the law might hear. Well. Pike sauntered toward them, hand resting on his pistol. Claire Franklin, bold as brass, and keeping mighty interesting company. Deputy Pike. She kept her voice neutral. I'm looking for a room and a meal. Know anywhere that serves both without a side of harassment? Pike's grin was all teeth and no warmth. Dolores Valdez might take you at her boarding house. She's got a soft spot for strays and... His eyes flicked to Nantan. Lost causes. Nantan stood perfectly still, but Claire could feel the tension radiating from him. One wrong move, one excuse, and Pike would have him in irons or worse. A Mrs. Valdez it is, then... Claire started to move past, but Pike stepped into their path. Your Apache friend there needs to know the rules. No weapons in town limits, no gathering in groups, no being on the streets after sunset. He leaned in, breath sour with tobacco. No touching white women, even ones who seemed to have forgotten their place. Claire's hand itched for her gun, but she forced it to stillness. Federal law says treaty Indians can travel freely for trade and commerce, unless you're saying Calico Wells stands above federal law. Pike's face darkened. You always were too clever for your own good. Girl, just like your daddy. Look how that turned out for him. The implied threat hung between them like a challenge. Claire met his gaze steadily. Yes, let's look at that, closely, with witnesses and documentation. Something flickered in Pike's eyes, not quite fear, but caution. He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. Welcome to Calico Wells. Miss Franklin, do try to enjoy your stay. They found the Valdez boarding house on a side street, a 2-story adobe building with a hand-painted sign in both English and Spanish. Window boxes held struggling geraniums, and lace curtains spoke of someone trying to maintain dignity in a hard place. Dolores Valdez answered their knock, herself a handsome woman in her 40s with silver threading through black hair worn in a practical bun. Her dark eyes assessed them quickly, taking in Claire's trail dust and Nantan's proud bearing. You need rooms, she said. It wasn't a question. I have 2 available, separate floors, separate entrances, house rules. We understand, Claire said. Do you? Dolores studied them more closely. I run a respectable establishment. I also believe in minding my own business as long as my guests do the same. Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6. No cooking in rooms, no visitors after 9, no trouble brought to my door. We're not here to cause trouble, Claire assured her. Child, you walk down Main Street together. Trouble's already taken notice. But Dolores stepped aside. 25 cents a night. 50 if you want meals included. Bath is extra. Claire paid for 2 nights in advance, noting how Dolores's eyes widened slightly at the sight of actual silver coins rather than company script or promises. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the back alley. Claire sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. They'd agreed Nantan would scout the town's edges while she gathered information in places he couldn't safely go. But first, she desperately needed to wash off the trail. The bathhouse was attached to the boarding house. Fed by a natural hot spring, one of the few reliable water sources Edison didn't control. Yet, Claire sank into the warm water with a groan of relief. Letting it ease muscles she hadn't realized were knotted. "You look like you've been wrestling the desert and losing." Claire's eyes snapped open. A young woman about her age stood in the doorway, carrying towels, Mexican features, bright, intelligent eyes, wearing a simple but well-made dress. "I'm Rosa," the woman said. "I help my aunt with the boarding house. You're the Franklin girl, the one looking for her brother." News traveled fast in small towns. "You know about Eli?" Rosa glanced behind her, then stepped fully into the room, closing the door. "I know he stayed here 3 weeks ago. Paid in advance for a week. Only used 3 nights. Left in the middle of the night with 2 of Edison's men." Claire sat up straighter, water sloshing. "Did he seem forced? Scared? More like, asked my aunt to hold some letters for him. Said someone would come asking." Rosa set down the towels and pulled an oilskin packet from her apron. Said to look for a woman who'd ask the right questions. With trembling hands, Claire opened the packet. 3 letters in Eli's careful script. She scanned them quickly, her heart sinking with each word. The first detailed Edison's plan to contaminate water sources to drive out homesteaders and Apache alike. The second contained names, dates, amounts, a careful record of bribes paid to territorial officials. The third, dated the night he disappeared, was addressed to her. "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Edison promised medicine for Mrs. Valdez's consumption if I helped with one job. Just bookkeeping, he said, but it's murder he's planning. Mass murder. When I tried to back out, he said I was already implicated. Said they'd hang us both if I didn't finish what I started. I'm going to try to sabotage his plan from the inside. If I fail, these letters are evidence. Find Benjamin Warren at Fort Grant. He's the only honest officer I've met. Trust the Apache. They know what Edison really is. I'm sorry, sister, for everything. Claire read it twice, her eyes burning. Eli, trying to do right and getting trapped in Edison's web. At least he was alive, or had been 2 weeks ago. "The medicine," she asked Rosa. "Did it come?" "No." Rosa's voice was bitter. "My aunt grows weaker every day. Edison's doctor has the new treatment from back east, but only for those who can pay his prices or do his favors." Claire folded the letters carefully. "Your aunt took a risk holding these. She believes in justice. Says it's the only thing that separates us from animals." Rosa paused at the door. "Your Apache friend. He should know that Edison's men have been asking about him. Specifically him. They know he's been helping you." After Rosa left, Claire dried and dressed quickly, mind racing. The letters changed everything. She had proof now, but proof meant nothing if the law was bought and paid for. And Benjamin Warren at Fort Grant was 3 days' ride through hostile territory. She found Dolores in the boarding house kitchen, preparing the evening meal despite a cough that shook her thin frame. The older woman waved off Claire's attempt to help. "Tell me about the night Eli left." Claire said, "Dolores added chilies to a pot of beans, considering." 2 men came. One was Luther Grant, Edison's foreman. The other I didn't know, city clothes. Soft hands. They talked to your brother in the parlor. I couldn't hear words, but I know the sound of threats when they're being made." "Did Eli say anything to you?" "Only that he was sorry for the trouble he might bring. Sweet boy. Too gentle for this hard country." Dolores had another coughing fit, spots of red staining her handkerchief. "He asked about the old Butterfield stage route, whether it still ran to the mining camps. The abandoned silver mines. Of course, isolated, forgotten, perfect for whatever dark work Edison had planned." A commotion from the street interrupted her thoughts. Through the kitchen window, she saw Nantan surrounded by Pike and 3 deputies, all with guns drawn. Routine check, Pike was saying loudly, playing to the gathering crowd, making sure our Apache visitor ain't carrying contraband. Claire burst through the front door.
Deputy Pike, what seems to be the problem?
No problem. Miss Franklin, just keeping the peace. Pike's smile was predatory. Your friend here was asking questions down by the freight office. Made some folks nervous. Since when is asking questions a crime? Since those questions were about train schedules and cargo manifests. Sounds like someone planning robbery to me. It was a setup, clear as day. Claire's mind raced for a solution that didn't involve gunplay in the middle of town. Then Dolores appeared beside her, moving with surprising speed despite her illness. Deputy Pike, she said coolly, this man is my hired guide. I've engaged him to escort a shipment of medical supplies from Fort Grant, unless you're saying I can't conduct legitimate business. Pike's face went through several colors. Dolores Valdez was respected in town, her late husband having been a war hero. More importantly, she knew secrets about half the prominent men in the territory, including which ones visited the rooms above the saloon when their wives thought they were at prayer meeting. Now, Mrs. Valdez, no need to take that tone. Then release my employee immediately. She produced a piece of paper from her pocket. Here's his employment contract, properly witnessed. Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing. Pike holstered his gun reluctantly, gesturing for his men to do the same. This ain't over. One step out of line. After the deputies retreated, Dolores ushered them inside. They're getting bolder, or more desperate. Why help us? Nantan asked quietly. This brings you danger. Dolores smiled sadly. Young man, I'm already dying. Edison's greed has seen to that. But perhaps I can help others live. She turned to Claire. Your brother mentioned a man named Harrison Morse. Said he was the only one of Edison's inner circle who showed conscience. Works at the land office. Claire memorized the name. Another thread to follow. Mrs. Valdez. Dolores, child. We're past formalities. She suppressed another cough. Now, you two need to eat and plan. Something tells me tonight will bring more than stars. The dining room held a mix of travelers and locals, conversations dying as Claire and Nantan entered. They took a corner table, backs to the wall, and ate Dolores's excellent beans and cornbread while pretending not to notice the stares. I found where they're holding the chemicals, Nantan said quietly between bites. Warehouse, near the rail depot. Guards, but not many. They're confident. Eli's letters confirm the poisoning plan. We need to get them to Fort Grant, to this Benjamin Warren. 3 days through Apache territory and Edison's patrol routes. He considered. Unless we take the old stage road, rougher but less watched. You know it. My uncle drove for Butterfield before the war. I rode with him sometimes as a boy. Something soft entered his expression at the memory. He said the desert looked different from a driver's seat. Said you could see the future coming in the dust clouds. Claire found herself watching his face as he talked, the way memory gentled his features. What happened to him? Soldiers. They needed Apache scouts for a campaign. He refused. They insisted. Nantan's jaw tightened. He never came back. I'm sorry. It's why I learned their language, their laws. My grandmother said knowing your enemy's words is the first defense. He met her eyes. But you're not my enemy. Claire Franklin, I need you to know that. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. Around them. The dining room seemed to fade. There was only this moment, this connection across a scarred wooden table. Hey there, Missy. The moment shattered. A man loomed over their table, big drunk, wearing the crossed pickaxes insignia of Edison's mining operations. 2 friends flanked him, equally intoxicated. Heard you was Tom Franklin's girl. The miner slurred. Your daddy cost me good wages when he blocked the copper mine expansion. Seems you're looking to cause trouble too. Claire's hand dropped to her lap, inches from her gun. "I'm just having dinner, Mr.
Newcomb, Josiah Newcomb."
He leaned in, breath reeking of whiskey.
"Having dinner with a savage? Your daddy'd roll in his grave."
"My father respected all people who acted with honor," Claire said evenly.
"Which already puts him ahead of you."
Newcomb's face flushed. He grabbed for Claire's wrist, but Nantan moved faster. Without seeming to rise, he had Newcomb's arm twisted behind his back, the drunk man suddenly gasping in pain.
"The lady is finishing her meal,"
Nantan said calmly. "You're leaving." "You dare touch a white man?" one of Newcomb's friends sputtered. "Would you prefer I didn't touch him?" Nantan increased the pressure slightly. Newcomb whimpered. I could let go. Of course, his arm might not work properly again. Deputy Pike appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. For a moment, Claire thought he might actually do his job. Then he saw Dolores watching from the kitchen entrance and apparently decided discretion was wiser. "Newcomb, you're drunk. Get out before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." Nantan released the miner, who stumbled away, cradling his arm. The dining room slowly returned to normal, though the tension remained thick.
"We should go,"
Claire said quietly. "No," Nantan's voice was firm. "We finish our meal. Show no fear, no shame. This is their test." So they finished eating, Claire acutely aware of every eye in the room. When they finally rose, she left payment on the table and walked out with her head high, Nantan beside her like a shadow. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Pike stood across the street, making a show of checking his pocket watch. "Sunset, Apache," he called out. "You know the rules." "He's retiring to his room, Deputy." Claire said, "As am I." "See that you do. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings in the dark." They parted at the boarding house stairs, Nantan heading to his ground floor room while Claire climbed to hers. She felt the weight of unspoken words between them, the pull of something that grew stronger with each shared danger. At her door, she turned. He stood at the foot of the stairs, watching her with eyes that held too much. "Thank you," she said softly. "For dinner, for everything." "Lock your door," was all he said. "Trust no one tonight." In her room, Claire barred the door and checked the window. The alley below was empty, but she didn't trust the shadows. She lit the lamp and spread Eli's letters on the bed, studying them for any clue to his exact location. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. 3 taps, pause. 2 taps, the signal they'd agreed on. She opened the door to find Rosa, face tight with urgency. "They're coming," the girl whispered. "Pike and a mob. Someone saw your friend near the warehouse. They're calling it attempted theft, planning to lynch him." Claire's blood went cold. "How long?" "Maybe 10 minutes. My aunt is trying to delay them, but—" "Get Nantan. Tell him to saddle the horses and meet me behind the livery stable." Claire was already reaching for her gun belt. "Go!" Rosa fled. Claire gathered the letters, her few supplies, and slipped down the back stairs. The town was stirring like a kicked anthill. Voices raised in ugly excitement. Nothing like the promise of violence to bring out the worst in people. She made it to the livery stable just as Nantan arrived with Victoria and his own mount. Without words, they swung into saddles and walked the horses quietly out the back gate. Then Pike's voice rang out, "There they're running!" Gunfire erupted. Claire felt a bullet whine past her ear as they spurred the horses into a gallop. The chase was on, racing through the desert darkness with a mob howling for blood behind them. But as the lights of Calico Wells fell away, Claire realized something. They weren't just running from injustice anymore. They were riding toward truth. The journey to Coyote Springs took 2 days of hard riding through country that seemed to fight their passage. By the time they crested the final ridge, both riders and horses were dust-covered and weary. But the sight that greeted them drove all exhaustion from Claire's mind. The springs formed a natural oasis in a bowl of red rock. Cottonwoods and willows clustered around pools of water so clear she could see the sandy bottom. Birds sang in the branches, and the air smelled of growth and life, a stark contrast to the harsh desert they'd crossed.
It's beautiful, she breathed.
Nantan dismounted, his movements reverent. This is why we fight. Not for land that can be bought and sold, but for this life itself. He led her to a flat stone near the largest pool, where generations of his people had left offerings. Small items lay weathered by time pottery shards, carved wooden figures, bundles of sage. Nantan added his own offering, a small piece of turquoise, from his pouch and spoke quietly in Apache. I told the spirits you are a friend, he explained, that you understand water is sacred, not commodity. Claire felt the weight of that trust. She pulled out her father's compass, the one he'd carried surveying for the railroad before conscience turned him away, and placed it beside Nantan's turquoise.
So he can find his way in the spirit world,
she said softly. Something shifted in Nantan's expression, a warmth that made her pulse quicken. But before either could speak, the crack of a rifle shattered the peace. They dove behind the rocks as more shots followed. Claire caught a glimpse of their attackers, 5 men in Edison's employ, led by Luther Grant himself. A rooker, Grant shouted. We know you're there. Come out, and this doesn't have to get ugly. Theodore Rooker emerged from behind a boulder, hands raised. Claire recognized him, a grizzled scout who'd worked for everyone from the army to the railroad, selling his knowledge to the highest bidder. What was he doing here? Now, Luther, no need for all this drama, Rooker called back, his voice carrying that easy drawl of a man used to talking his way out of trouble.
Just watering my horse like any traveler might.
With them. Grant jerked his head toward where Claire and Nantan had taken cover. You always did have poor taste in companions. Rooker. More men appeared from the rocks they'd walked into an ambush. Claire counted at least a dozen, all armed. Her hand found Nantan's, a brief squeeze of shared understanding. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Here's what's going to happen, Grant continued. The Apache comes with us. There's a matter of attempted theft to settle. Miss Franklin can ride on, if she's smart. And you, Rooker, are going to show us exactly where those Apache camps are hidden. Can't do that, Luther. Rooker spat tobacco juice with remarkable accuracy. Man's got to have some principles, even if they're few and bent. Grant's face darkened. Edison pays you good money. Paid, past tense, until he decided I knew too much and became a liability. Rooker's voice hardened. Funny how many of Edison's associates end up that way. Claire saw her chance in the tension between the men. Mr. Grant, she called out, not showing herself. Before this goes further, you should know I have documents proving Edison's plans to poison the water sources. Letters, ledgers, signed confessions. They're already on their way to Fort Grant. A lie. But Grant couldn't know that. She saw uncertainty flicker across his face. You're bluffing? Ask yourself why Edison sent you racing out here instead of coming himself. He's covering his tracks, and you're the loose end he's tying up. She let that sink in. When the federal marshals come, who do you think he'll blame? The hired foreman who got too zealous? That's who. She's got a point, Luther. One of the other men muttered. Edison ain't exactly known for loyalty. Shut up. Grant's control was slipping. Take them, all of them. The attack came from 2 directions. Claire fired, seeing one man spin away, clutching his shoulder. Beside her, Nantan had produced a rifle from somewhere, probably Rooker's, and was picking targets with deadly precision. But there were too many. They were being flanked, pushed back toward the springs with nowhere to run. Then Rooker did something unexpected. The old scout suddenly pulled a cavalry pistol and shot the man next to Grant, then dove behind cover as bullets filled the air where he'd been. Always hedging my bets, he cackled. That's how I lived this long. The betrayal threw Edison's men into confusion. In the chaos, Claire saw movement in the rocks above Apache warriors, drawn by the gunfire. Nantan called out in his language, and suddenly the odds had shifted. Grant saw it too. "Fall back," he shouted. "Fall back to the horses." The retreat was messy, Edison's men firing wildly as they fled. When the dust settled, 2 of them lay still, and the rest were racing away across the desert. Nantan's people emerged cautiously, 5 warriors, led by a young man who looked enough like Nantan to be a relative. They spoke rapidly in Apache while Claire checked Rooker, who'd taken a bullet in the side but was still grinning. "Just a scratch," he wheezed. "Had worse from angry husbands." "Why help us?" Claire pressed cloth against his wound. "You've been Edison's man for years." "Was, until I found out what he really planned." Rooker's face went serious. "Mass murder ain't in my job description. When I tried to quit, he made it clear I knew too much to live. Been hiding out here for a week, trying to figure my next move." The young warrior approached Thomas. Nantan called him his cousin. He spoke enough English to translate. "Grandmother says bring them all. The council needs to hear this." They made a strange procession, Claire and Nantan. The wounded Rooker tied to his horse, and the Apache escort. The camp wasn't far, hidden in a box canyon with multiple escape routes. Claire counted perhaps 30 people, mostly women, children, and elderly, with a handful of warriors. Nantan's grandmother, Susan, sat in the place of honor, a woman whose age was impossible to guess, with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. She listened without expression as Nantan explained recent events, occasionally asking sharp questions. "Finally," she turned to Claire. "You have the papers that prove Edison's evil." Claire produced Eli's letters, which Susan studied carefully despite probably not reading English. She handed them to Thomas, who translated key passages. Murmurs of anger rippled through the gathered people. "And your brother?" Susan asked. "He lives." "I believe so, hidden somewhere in Edison's territory." Susan nodded slowly, then turned to Rooker. "You worked for the enemy. Why should we trust you now?" Rooker met her gaze steadily. "Because I know where Edison's keeping his chemicals. Know where the boy is too, most likely. And because—" He grimaced as his wound pulled. "Because I got grandchildren back in Missouri. Don't want their world poisoned by men like Edison." The council deliberated in Apache. Claire caught a few words arguments about trust, risk, the wisdom of involving themselves in white men's affairs. "Finally!" Susan raised her hand for silence. "The water belongs to all life," she said in English, clearly intending Claire to understand. "If it is poisoned, all suffer. We will help." She looked at Nantan. "But you must promise no revenge, only justice. The Apache cannot afford another war." Nantan bowed his head. "I swear it, grandmother." Susan's eyes turned to Claire, and something knowing flickered there. "And you, Thomas Franklin's daughter, what do you swear?" Claire felt the weight of generations in that question. "I swear to see the truth known, to protect the innocent, to honor the trust you've shown me." "Good." Susan smiled, and years fell away from her face. "Now we plan." The war council that followed would have been remarkable in any circumstances. Apache warriors, a wounded white scout, and a determined woman mapping strategy by firelight. Rooker, despite his injury, proved invaluable. "Edison's got 3 places he might stash your brother," he explained, marking locations on a map drawn in the dirt. The old Butterfield station at Apache Pass, isolated, defensible. The abandoned silver mine near Devil's Canyon, lots of tunnels to hide things. Or his own ranch compound, hideous place, like a fortress. "The mine," Thomas said immediately. "I've scouted there, many guards, supplies going in but not out. That's also where he's storing the chemicals." Rooker added, "Barrels of the stuff, marked as mining supplies. Plan is to dump it all in the water sources simultaneously, make it look like natural contamination from old mining operations." Claire's stomach turned.
How many sources?
7 major springs, dozen smaller ones. Every water source between here and the San Pedro River. Rooker's face was grim. Kill the water. Kill the people. Buy the land cheap. Edison calls it progress. We stop him, Nantan said simply. Whatever it takes.
Not whatever,
Susan reminded sharply. Remember your promise. Justice, not revenge. They talked until dawn, refining plans, assigning roles. The Apache would handle reconnaissance and create diversions. Claire and Nantan would infiltrate the mine to find Eli and evidence. Rooker, despite his wound, insisted on guiding them through the back routes he'd scouted for Edison. As the meeting broke up, Susan caught Claire's arm. Walk with me. They strolled to the spring's edge, where morning light was just touching the water. Susan was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. My grandson looks at you as his grandfather once looked at me, with eyes that see tomorrow. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. We haven't... I know. Susan smiled. He is honorable, sometimes to a fault, but the heart wants what it wants, and fighting that is like fighting the sunrise. Even if it causes problems for everyone, problems come regardless. The question is, are they worth facing? Susan studied her. You are not like the town women who see my people as less than human, but neither are you Apache. Can you walk between worlds without losing yourself? Claire thought of her father, who'd tried to bridge cultures and paid dearly for it. I don't know, but I know I can't walk away from your grandson. Not now. Then don't, but understand if you choose him, you choose us all. Our struggles become yours. Our enemies hunt you. Our joys lift you. Susan touched Claire's face gently. It is not an easy path. The easy path led through that canyon. Claire said, I nearly died there. Nantan saved me. Maybe the hard path is the only one worth taking. Susan laughed, a sound like water over stones. You'll do. Claire Franklin, you'll do. As they walked back, Claire saw Nantan waiting by the horses, checking supplies. The sunrise painted him in gold and shadow, and her heart clenched with wanting what Susan had described a tomorrow with eyes wide open. Ready? He asked as she approached. Yes, and she was, for whatever came next. They set out with Rooker and 2 of Thomas's warriors, leaving the main camp as the sun climbed higher. The old scout, tough as leather despite his wound, led them through passages Claire would never have found alone, narrow defiles between towering rocks, hidden valleys where ancient streams had carved secret roads. Edison thinks he knows this country, Rooker muttered as they rested the horses. But he only knows the surface. The Apache shown me depths he'll never see. By afternoon, they were overlooking the abandoned mine. It sprawled across a hillside like a cancer derricks and sluices, outbuildings in the gaping mouth of the main shaft, and everywhere, guards. Claire counted at least 20 visible, probably more inside. There, Rooker pointed with his chin. That reinforced shed, that's where they're storing the chemicals. And that building by the mine entrance, if your brother's here, that's where he'd be. Easy to guard, hard to escape. Claire studied the layout, her mind racing. Too many for a direct assault. Good thing we're not assaulting, Nantan smiled grimly. Thomas, the young warrior grinned. 1 hour, maybe 2. We'll have them chasing ghosts across half the territory. As Thomas and his companion melted away into the landscape, Nantan turned to Claire. Once the diversion starts, we go in fast. Find your brother. Get evidence if we can. Get out. What about the chemicals? One problem at a time, Rooker advised. Save the boy first. Edison's poisons aren't going anywhere today. They waited, tension building. Claire found herself pressed against Nantan behind a boulder, aware of every point of contact. His hand rested on her shoulder, steadying or reassuring. She wasn't sure which. After this, she said quietly, what happens even if we succeed? We face what comes. His thumb traced a small circle on her shoulder. Together, if you're willing. I'm willing, but your grandmother asked me if I could walk between worlds. I don't know if I'm strong enough. He turned her to face him, eyes serious. You tracked across the desert alone, faced down Edison's men, earned my grandmother's approval, which, trust me, is harder than all the rest combined. His hand cupped her cheek. You're the strongest person I know, Claire Franklin. She leaned into his touch, about to reply, when smoke began rising from the far side of the mining camp. Shouts erupted, then gunfire. Half the guards went running toward the disturbance. Now, Nantan said. They moved fast and low, using the chaos as cover. The building Rooker had indicated was newer than the rest. Solid construction with barred windows. One guard remained at the door, his attention fixed on the distant action. Nantan took him down silently, efficiently. They dragged the unconscious man inside. Where Claire's heart leapt, Eli sat chained to a post, thin and dirty but alive.
Claire,
his voice cracked.
You can't be here. It's a trap.
Quiet. She was already working on his chains with the guard's keys. We're getting you out. No, you don't understand. Edison wanted you to come. He's been... The door slammed shut, through the barred window. Luther Grant's face appeared, grinning unpleasantly. Right on schedule. Miss Franklin, Edison said you'd come for the boy. Family sentiment so predictable. Claire's blood ran cold as she heard bars dropping into place outside. They were locked in. In the distance, the gunfire was dying down, the diversion ending. Edison's on his way, Grant continued. Wants to handle this personally. Something about tying up all loose ends at once. He walked away laughing, leaving them trapped. Eli slumped against Claire, finally free of chains but too weak to stand. I'm sorry, he whispered. So sorry. I just wanted to help people. The medicine for Mrs. Valdez, thought I could earn it honestly. But Edison, he showed me the ledgers, made me understand I was already complicit. Said if I ran, you'd hang for my crimes. Shh, Claire held him, mind racing. We're going to get out of this. Nantan was examining the walls, testing boards. Rooker, he's still out there. As if summoned, they heard a scratching at the rear wall. Boards began to loosen. The old scout had found tools somewhere and was working to create an escape route. Hurry up in there. His voice came through. Company's coming, and not the pleasant kind. They worked together, pulling boards as Rooker pried from outside. The hole grew slowly, too slowly. Claire could hear horses approaching, voices calling orders. Finally, the gap was wide enough. Claire pushed Eli through first, then squeezed out herself. Nantan followed just as the front door burst open. Run, Rooker urged, but Eli could barely walk. Nantan simply picked up the younger man and ran, carrying him like a child. They made it to the horses as shouts erupted behind them. Mounted, they fled into the gathering dusk, gunfire chasing but not catching them. They rode hard into the night, not stopping until they reached a defensible position in the rocks. Eli was unconscious by then, his body finally giving in to exhaustion and deprivation. He needs a doctor, Claire said desperately. Camp, Nantan replied. Susan will know what to do. But as they prepared to ride on, Rooker held up his hand. Listen. Hoofbeats, many of them, and from multiple directions. They were surrounded. A voice called out, cultured, cold, amused. Claire had heard it only once before, at her father's funeral, offering condolences that felt like threats. Miss Franklin, Nantan of the Apache, Mr. Rooker, you disappointing man. I am Cyrus Edison, and I believe we have business to discuss. He rode into view, immaculate despite the desert setting. With him were at least 30 men, all armed, positioned to cut off any escape. Here's my proposition. Edison continued. Surrender now, and I'll make it clean. The boy can have a proper trial. I'll even ensure he's found guilty of lesser charges. Prison instead of hanging. The Apache returns to his people with a warning to stay away from my interests. And you, Miss Franklin, sign over your father's land claims and disappear. Everyone lives. Counteroffer. Claire called back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You surrender to federal authorities, confess your crimes, and maybe you'll live long enough to see trial. Edison laughed. Brave to the end, just like your father. Very well, we do this the hard way. But before he could give the order, new riders appeared, Apache warriors, moving like ghosts through Edison's line. Thomas had brought reinforcements. The neat trap became a chaotic melee as Edison's men found themselves caught between two forces. In the confusion, Claire saw their chance. The chemical storage, she shouted to Nantan. If we can destroy it. He understood immediately. While others fought, they circled back toward the mine. The shed Rooker had identified was guarded, but not heavily. Most men had joined the pursuit. Claire shot the lock off while Nantan dealt with the guards. Inside, barrels of chemicals stood stacked like promises of death. The smell alone made her eyes water. How? She asked. Nantan was already moving, finding mining explosives in a nearby shed. Get clear. When this goes. Together, she said firmly. We do this together. They worked fast, setting charges, creating a fuse long enough to give them time. As they lit it and ran, Claire saw Edison himself riding hard toward them, his face a mask of fury. You have no idea what you've cost me, he screamed. The explosion answered him. The chemical shed vanished in a ball of flame that lit the night like a second sun. The heat washed over them, followed by a rain of debris. Edison's horse reared, throwing him. In the aftermath, as Edison's men scattered and the Apache warriors pressed their advantage, Claire found herself face to face with the man who'd orchestrated so much death and suffering. He lay in the dust, dazed but conscious, his empire of poison literally up in smoke. It's over, she told him. He laughed bitterly. You think this changes anything? I have judges, governors, senators in my pocket. You've won nothing. Maybe? Claire pulled out Eli's letters, now supplemented with documents they'd grabbed from the mine office. But these say otherwise, and there's a federal marshal at Fort Grant who's very interested in railroad corruption. You remember the train robbery you framed my brother for? Turns out the Army takes theft of their weapons very seriously. Edison's face went pale as he realized the implications. Federal charges meant federal prison, beyond the reach of his territorial connections. The battle was winding down. Edison's mercenaries, seeing their employer defeated and their prize destroyed, were surrendering or fleeing. The Apache had won without a single fatality on their side. Susan would be pleased. As dawn broke over the desert, they gathered at the ruins of Edison's ambitions. Eli, weak but alive, leaned against his sister. Rooker, cheerfully counting the bounty he'd claimed for helping capture Edison, tended his wound. The Apache warriors watched their prisoners with careful eyes, and Nantan stood with Claire as she looked out over the landscape her father had loved, now safe from one threat at least. What now? He asked softly. Now we take Edison to Fort Grant, see justice done properly. Then, she turned to him, decision clear in her eyes. Then we build something better. Together, if your people will have me. They already have. He took her hand, entwining their fingers. As have I. The sun rose fully, painting Coyote Springs in shades of gold and promise. The water ran clear and would continue to do so. It was enough for a beginning. Susan was waiting when they returned to camp. Eli supported between Claire and Nantan. Without a word, she began examining the young man, clicking her tongue at his condition but nodding approval at his spirit. He'll heal, she pronounced, body and soul, with time and care. As the camp settled into the rhythm of victory, prisoners secured, wounded tended. Stories shared, Claire found herself by the spring again. The offering stones remained, her father's compass among them. He would be proud, Nantan said, joining her. You honored his memory and his principles.
We did, all of us.
She looked up at him. That's what he'd really be proud of, that we stood together. Nantan pulled her close, and this time she didn't resist. The kiss was everything the desert was: fierce and gentle, dangerous and life-giving, ancient and eternally new. When they broke apart, the world had shifted on its axis. So, she said, slightly breathless, what's Apache courting tradition? Should I expect horses, feats of bravery, poetry? He laughed, a rich sound that warmed her more than the morning sun. Usually, but you've already proven your bravery. I have no horses to give, and my poetry is terrible. Then I suppose we'll have to make our own tradition.
I suppose we will.
The victory at the mine had bought them time, but not safety. 3 days later, as Claire helped tend Eli's recovery in the Apache camp, the war drums of Edison's influence began to beat. Thomas burst into the healing lodge where Susan was teaching Claire the properties of desert plants. Riders coming, many flying cavalry colors. Claire's heart sank. Edison's reach extended to the military. She should have expected this. Nantan appeared at her shoulder, his expression grim. How many? 40, maybe 50, full company, and... Thomas hesitated. They have the big guns, the ones on wheels. Artillery against a camp of mostly women and children. Claire felt sick. We need to evacuate. She said, No. Susan's voice was firm.
We run no more. This is sacred ground. We stand.
Grandmother, Nantan began, but she silenced him with a gesture. Prepare for council. If they want war, they declare it properly, face to face. The cavalry arrived as the sun reached its zenith, forming precise lines that spoke of discipline and training. At their head rode a man Claire recognized with mixed feelings, Colonel William Harrison, called Gray Fox by the Apache for his cunning in battle. He was also, if rumors held true, one of the few honest officers left in the territory. I would speak with the Apache leaders, Harrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of years of command. And with Miss Claire Franklin, if she is present. Claire stepped forward, Nantan beside her. Colonel Harrison, I'm surprised Edison's money reached even you. Harrison's weathered face showed a flash of anger. Madam, I have served this uniform for 30 years without stain. I'm here on federal orders, investigating the destruction of private property and the kidnapping of American citizens. Then you're here on false pretenses. Claire shot back. The only kidnapping was Edison holding my brother prisoner. The only property destroyed was chemicals intended for mass murder. So you claim, Mr. Edison tells a different story. He says Apache warriors attacked his legitimate mining operation, destroyed valuable supplies, and that you and your brother were willing participants in this terrorism. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Claire saw hands moving toward weapons on both sides. Colonel, Nantan spoke with careful control. Would a man planning legitimate mining need enough poison to contaminate every water source from here to the San Pedro River? Harrison's eyes sharpened. You have proof of this. Claire produced Eli's letters, now worn from handling. My brother's testimony, written before his imprisonment, detailing Edison's plans. The colonel dismounted, a gesture that eased tension slightly. He took the letters, reading with the focus of a career military man used to parsing truth from reports.
These are serious allegations,
he said finally. They warrant investigation, but I have my orders. All parties involved must come to Fort Grant for a formal inquiry. A trial, you mean? Thomas spat. Where Edison owns the judge. A federal inquiry, Harrison corrected. With federal oversight, I give you my word. Your word has been given before. Susan interrupted, approaching with the dignity of a queen despite her simple dress. To my father, to his father, each time, promises broken like dry sticks. Harrison had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. The Army's word has been inconsistent. But I am not the Army. I am one man trying to find justice in an unjust world. Pretty words, Susan replied. But words are smoke. What do you offer besides words? The colonel considered. Claire could see him weighing options. Duty against conscience. Finally, I offer this, come voluntarily. All of you. I'll guarantee your safety personally. Any trial will be federal, not territorial, and... He paused, making a decision. I'll ensure certain documents reach Washington. Documents about water rights, treaty violations, and the systematic corruption of territorial officials. You would do this? Nantan asked skeptically. I'm 3 months from retirement, Harrison said dryly. What are they going to do? Court-martial me for following federal law. Besides, I've seen what happens when water rights get perverted. Fought in the Navajo Wars. Saw good land turn to dust. Good people turn to ghosts. No more. Not on my watch. Claire felt a spark of hope. An honest officer could change everything. But looking around at the Apache faces, some defiant, some fearful, all bearing the weight of broken promises, she knew trust wouldn't come easily. I'll go, she announced. Eli too. When he's strong enough, we have nothing to hide. No, Nantan's voice was flat. If you go, I go. And if my grandson goes, we all go, Susan added, steel in her tone. You want your inquiry. Colonel Harrison, you'll have it. But we come as a people, not as prisoners. Harrison nodded slowly. Agreed. Though I warn you, Edison has powerful friends. This won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Claire said. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. The entire camp would move to Fort Grant, a journey of 3 days with children and elderly. Harrison's soldiers, to their credit, helped rather than hindered, sharing supplies and scouting safe routes. Claire found herself riding between worlds, translating, mediating, building bridges of understanding, one conversation at a time. She watched Nantan do the same, his natural leadership evident as he coordinated with Harrison's sergeants. You're good at this, she told him one evening as they watered the horses. Bringing people together. My grandmother was right. I was born to walk between worlds. He looked at her meaningfully. As were you. I'm just a rancher's daughter who got in over her head. No. He caught her hand. You're a woman who sees justice clearly and fights for it fearlessly. The Apache have a word, Guyen. It means woman warrior. But more than that, it means one whose strength comes from protecting others. Guyen, Claire repeated, tasting the word. I like it better than Miss Franklin. Their arrival at Fort Grant caused a sensation. A full Apache band riding openly into the fort hadn't happened in years. Soldiers lined the walls. Civilians gathered to stare. And in the midst of it all stood Edison with his lawyers and a smirk that made Claire's blood boil. Colonel Harrison, Edison called out cheerfully. Thank you for apprehending these criminals. I trust they'll be secured properly. They're here voluntarily for a federal inquiry, Harrison replied coldly. They'll be housed as guests, not prisoners. Edison's smile faltered. Surely you're not taking the word of savages and a hysterical woman over a respected businessman. I'm taking evidence over assumptions, Mr. Edison, as the law requires. The inquiry convened the next day in the fort's main hall. Captain Benjamin Warren, the officer Eli had mentioned, presided a young man with intelligent eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility that had likely stunted his career. Edison had come prepared. 3 lawyers, stacks of documents, and a parade of witnesses who testified to his upstanding character and the Apache's threatening presence near his legitimate business interests. But Claire had truth on her side, and truth has a way of shining through lies. Eli, still weak but determined, testified first. His quiet recounting of Edison's coercion, the forced complicity in planned murder, and his imprisonment moved even hardened soldiers. When Edison's lawyer tried to paint him as a willing accomplice turned coward, Eli met his gaze steadily. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I let fear for my sister's safety override my conscience. But I'm here now, telling the truth. How many of Edison's other employees can say the same?" Rooker testified next, cheerfully admitting his checkered past before detailing Edison's operations. Maps were produced. Chemical compositions explained, the full scope of the planned poisoning laid bare. "Objection," Edison's lead lawyer protested. "This man is the admitted criminal, a turncoat who'd say anything, who's being paid nothing for his testimony," Rooker interrupted. "Unlike some folks in this room." When Nantan took the stand, Edison's team tried a different tactic. They questioned his right to testify at all, claiming Apache testimony was inherently unreliable. Captain Warren's response was icy. "Mr. Nantan is a recognized leader of his people, who are protected by federal treaty. His word carries the same weight as any man's in this court." Nantan testified with careful precision, explaining the sacred nature of the water sources, the generational knowledge of their locations, and the devastating impact their poisoning would have not just on the Apache, but on all life in the region. "Water doesn't see race," he concluded. "Poison doesn't choose its victims. What Edison planned would have killed indiscriminately Apache, Mexican, American, evil that complete recognizes no boundaries." But it was Susan's testimony that truly turned the tide. The elderly woman spoke through Thomas as translator, her dignity filling the room. "I have lived through 60 winters," she said. "I have seen my people pushed from lands we held since time began. I have watched promises broken like eggs, treaties torn like old cloth. But this poisoning the water itself, this goes beyond war, beyond greed. This is evil that would make the earth itself weep." She looked directly at Edison. "You see my people as obstacles to your wealth, but we are the ones who know which plants heal and which harm, where water runs true and where it lies false. We are the memory of this land. Destroy us, and you destroy your own future." Edison's lawyers tried to discredit her as a primitive woman clinging to superstition, but their words fell flat against her obvious wisdom and grace. Finally, Claire took the stand. She spoke of her father, his principles, his suspicious death. She detailed her search for Eli, the attempts on her life, the systematic campaign of terror Edison had waged. "But this isn't just about my family," she said, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "This is about what kind of place we want the territory to become. One where might makes right and money justifies murder, or one where law means something, where water belongs to all, where different peoples can live as neighbors." Edison's lawyer pounced. "Pretty sentiments, Miss Franklin, but let's discuss your relationship with the Apache warrior. Isn't it true you've been living among them, that you've taken one as a lover?" The room stirred. This was the scandal Edison had counted on the proper white woman fallen to base desires. Claire's chin rose. "I've found more honor among the Apache than in any corporate boardroom, more truth around their fires than in your clients' ledgers. If that scandalized you, perhaps you should examine your own prejudices." "Answer the question," the lawyer pressed. "Have you engaged in improper relations?" "Counselor," Captain Warren interrupted coldly, "Miss Franklin's personal associations have no bearing on whether Mr. Edison planned to poison water supplies. Move on or sit down." The lawyer sat down. Edison himself took the stand last, all wounded dignity and righteous indignation. He painted himself as a visionary bringing progress to backward lands, beset by primitive peoples who couldn't appreciate civilization. But Harrison had one more card to play. "Mr. Edison, these documents were found in your office safe." He produced a ledger Claire hadn't seen before. "Would you care to explain these payments to territorial officials, the ones marked special considerations?" Edison went pale. "Those are legitimate business expenses." including $5,000 to Judge Horace Mann 2 days before he ruled in your favor on the water rights dispute. The room erupted. Warren gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Edison's own meticulous record-keeping had betrayed him. As the proceedings continued, Claire felt Nantan's presence beside her like a warm anchor. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The inquiry stretched for 3 days. Witnesses were recalled, documents examined, maps studied. Through it all, Harrison proved as good as his word fair, thorough, and immune to both bribes and threats. On the morning of the 4th day, with the entire fort holding its breath, Captain Warren delivered his findings. The evidence clearly shows that Cyrus Edison engaged in a conspiracy to commit mass murder through the poisoning of water supplies. He suborned territorial officials, imprisoned American citizens, and violated federal treaties with the Apache Nation. Edison shot to his feet.
This is preposterous, I demand.
"Sit down, Mr. Edison." Warren's voice cut like a saber. "You'll have your chance to appeal in federal court in Washington." The captain continued, "All charges against the Apache band are dismissed. The destruction of the chemical supplies is ruled justifiable prevention of mass murder. Mr. Theodore Rooker is granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. Mr. Eli Franklin is cleared of all charges related to the train robbery, which this inquiry finds was orchestrated by Mr. Edison himself." Claire felt tears streaming down her face. They'd done it. Justice, actual justice, in a court of law. "Furthermore," Warren announced, "all water rights in the affected area are to be held in federal trust pending a full review. No private entity may claim exclusive use of springs, rivers, or aquifers that serve multiple communities." The Apache delegation erupted in joy. Susan raised her arms to the sky, singing a praise song that needed no translation. Even Harrison's soldiers seemed moved by the moment. But Edison wasn't finished. As marshals moved to arrest him, he pulled a derringer from his coat. Time slowed as Claire saw him aim not at her, not at the officials who'd condemned him, but at Nantan, the leader who'd united Apache and white against him, the symbol of everything he hated. Claire moved without thinking, throwing herself sideways as Edison fired. The bullet meant for Nantan's heart caught her shoulder instead, spinning her to the ground. The room exploded into chaos. Edison's second shot went wild as soldiers tackled him. Nantan caught Claire as she fell, his face a mask of anguish. "Gu Yen," he whispered, pressing his hand against the wound. "My warrior woman, stay with me." Through the pain, Claire managed to smile. "Told you, we do things together." The fort's doctor was good. Trained in battlefield medicine, the bullet had passed through cleanly, missing vital organs. As Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, she heard voices Nantan refusing to leave her side, Susan singing healing songs, Eli reading to her from their father's journal. She woke fully on the 2nd day to find Nantan watching her with eyes that held storms. "If you ever take a bullet for me again—" "You'll what?" she interrupted weakly. "Stop walking between worlds with me." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Never, but next time, we dodge together." "Deal." Harrison visited as she recovered, bringing news. Edison was on his way to Washington under heavy guard. His empire was crumbling as investors fled and investigations expanded. The water sources would remain protected under federal oversight, with the Apache as official co-administrators. "You've won a great victory," the colonel told them. "But victories make enemies. Edison has friends who'll want revenge." "Then we'll face them," Claire said, "together." Harrison smiled. "I believe you will. I'm recommending you for a federal marshal position. Miss Franklin, the territory needs people who understand justice serves all people." Claire looked at Nantan, seeing her own surprise reflected there. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Susan commanded from the doorway.
The spirits didn't save you to waste your gifts.
As Harrison left and Susan bustled about with healing teas, Claire and Nantan found themselves alone. A federal marshal, he mused. The government giving power to someone who stands with the Apache. Times are changing. Will your people accept it, me enforcing white man's law? You enforce justice. There's a difference. He stroked her hair gently. Besides, you're not enforcing alone. Where you go, I go. That's what marriage means among my people. Claire's breath caught. Is that a proposal? It's a statement of what already is. We've been married since the moment you chose to stand with us at the Springs. The ceremony just tells others what we already know. She pulled him down for a kiss that said more than words could. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she grinned. So, about that Apache poetry you claimed was terrible. He laughed. For you, Guyen, I'll write epics. Outside, Fort Grant continued its military rhythms. But something had changed. Apache and soldiers worked side by side, preparing for the band's departure. Conversations sparked across cultural lines. Children played together while their parents watched in wonder. It was a small start. One fort, one victory. One love story among many tragedies. But as Claire had learned in the desert, even the mightiest river begins with a single spring. The water ran clear. The truth had prevailed. And two souls who'd found each other across impossible divides began planning a future neither could have imagined alone. Together, Claire murmured, already drifting back to sleep. Always, Nantan confirmed. And in the high desert of Arizona territory, under stars that had witnessed countless stories of loss and hope, their new chapter began. The abandoned silver mine loomed before them like a mouthful of broken teeth, its timbers bleached white by years of desert sun. Claire pressed her hand against her still-healing shoulder, feeling the ache that warned of coming storms. 2 weeks had passed since the inquiry at Fort Grant, 2 weeks of recovery and planning, and now the real work began. You sure about this intelligence? Colonel Harrison asked, studying the mine through his field glasses. Theodore Rooker spat tobacco juice with remarkable accuracy. Sure as sunrise. My old drinking partner Benjamin Morse saw the manifests himself. Edison might be heading to trial, but his lieutenants are moving the evidence. Documents, gold, and... He paused significantly. Prisoners who know too much. Claire's heart clenched. They'd received word that Edison had been keeping other prisoners witnesses to his crimes. Men who'd tried to leave his employ. Even a federal investigator who'd gotten too close to the truth. How many men guard it? Nantan asked from his position beside Claire. 12 during the day, more at night. They're rotating guards from Edison's remaining operations. Rooker scratched his graying beard. But there's something else. Pike's there. Word is he's gone half mad since the inquiry, blaming everyone for Edison's downfall. Deputy Pike. Claire remembered his cruel eyes, his casual racism, his delight in wielding petty power. If he was cornered and desperate, he'd be doubly dangerous. We go tonight, Harrison decided. Federal marshals from Tucson arrive tomorrow. We need those documents intact before anyone can destroy them. As the sun sank toward the horizon, their mixed force prepared Harrison's soldiers, Apache warriors led by Thomas, and Claire herself. Still adjusting to the weight of the federal marshal's badge Harrison had pinned to her vest that morning, the appointment had come through with unprecedented speed, backed by Captain Warren's recommendation and, surprisingly, several territorial officials eager to distance themselves from Edison's taint. Remember, Harrison addressed the assembled force. We need evidence and living witnesses. This isn't about revenge. It's about completing what we started at Fort Grant. Claire caught Susan watching from the ridge where the non-combatants waited. The elderly woman raised her hand in blessing, and Claire felt the weight of the small medicine pouch at her throat, Susan's gift for protection. As darkness fell, they moved into position. The mine's layout was burned into Claire's memory from Rooker's detailed sketches. Main entrance, 2 secondary shafts, and a ventilation tunnel that led to the underground workshops where Edison had planned his chemical mixing. "Guard change in 10 minutes," Nantan whispered, consulting his pocket watch, a gift from Harrison, acknowledging him as a tactical equal. "Ready." Claire nodded, checking her father's Colt one last time. The familiar weight centered her, connected her to the man who'd started this fight for justice years before either of them knew it. The attack began with Apache precision. Thomas and his warriors neutralized the perimeter guards silently, using techniques that left men unconscious but breathing. No killing unless necessary. Susan's command and Harrison's orders aligned on this point. Claire, Nantan, and a squad of soldiers entered through the ventilation shaft, while Harrison's main force created a diversion at the front. The tunnel was tight, airless, bringing back memories of that flash flood in the canyon. But Nantan's steady presence behind her kept the panic at bay. They emerged in a lamplit chamber where Claire's worst fears were confirmed. 3 men sat chained to the wall, one in the tattered remains of a federal marshal's uniform, another bearing the marks of sustained interrogation, the third barely more than a boy, perhaps 17. "Marshal Franklin," the federal man croaked, recognizing her badge. "James Hickok, been waiting for backup." Claire was already working on his chains. "How long have you been here?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. Edison grabbed me when I got too close to his shipping records." Hickok tried to stand, stumbled. "The documents you need, Pike's got them in the office level. He's been burning them, bit by bit. Says he's sending Edison messages in smoke." The young prisoner spoke up, voice cracking. "He's insane. Keeps talking about purification, about finishing Edison's great work. He's got more chemicals. Says if he can't poison the water, he'll poison the air." Claire's blood ran cold. A madman with access to industrial chemicals in an enclosed mine. They'd walked into more than evidence retrieval, they'd found a potential massacre. Gunfire erupted from the main entrance, Harrison's diversion escalating, but closer, too close, came the sound of running boots. "Move," Nantan ordered, helping Hickok while soldiers assisted the other prisoners. They made it halfway to the ventilation shaft before Pike appeared at the chamber entrance, wild-eyed and holding a lamp in one hand, a glass bottle in the other. "The Apache doxy and her pet savage," he sneered. "Come to steal Edison's legacy." "Put the bottle down." "Pike," Claire said evenly, hand on her gun, but not drawing. "Whatever's in there won't bring Edison back." "Bring him back," Pike laughed, high and unhinged. "He's not gone, just ascending, and when he returns, he'll find his work complete." He raised the bottle. "Do you know what happens when this hits flame, beautiful? Purifying devastation." Nantan moved like lightning, his thrown knife striking the bottle from Pike's hand. The glass shattered against stone, its contents hissing and smoking but not igniting. Pike screamed in rage, drawing his gun. The shot was impossibly loud in the confined space. Claire had drawn and fired in one motion, her bullet catching Pike's gun hand. His weapon spun away as he clutched his bleeding fingers. "It's over," she told him. "Surrender." But Pike was beyond reason. He grabbed the lamp, raising it high. "If I can't have purity, I'll have purification. We'll all burn together." He threw the lamp not at them, but at the wooden support beams soaked with years of chemical residue. Flames caught instantly, spreading with terrifying speed. "Everyone out," Claire shouted. "Now." They ran through tunnels rapidly filling with smoke. The young prisoner stumbled, and Claire hauled him upright. Behind them, the fire found something volatile. An explosion shook the entire mine. The ventilation shaft was too far. Smoke was already making breathing difficult. But Hickok, despite his condition, grabbed Nantan's arm. "Emergency exit," he gasped. "Pike showed it to me once. Gloating, this way." They followed the federal marshal through passages Claire didn't recognize. the smoke growing thicker. Her shoulders screamed with each movement, the healing wound protesting the exertion. Then, bless cool air, a hidden exit among the rocks. They tumbled out coughing and gasping as the mine became an inferno behind them. Harrison's forces had pulled back, the Apache warriors helping evacuate the area. In the distance, Pike could be heard screaming, trapped in his own mad conflagration. "The documents," Claire said despairingly. "The evidence—" "Not all lost," Hickok managed, pulling a leather portfolio from inside his shirt. "Grabbed this from Pike's desk weeks ago. Hid it in the wall. Financial records, correspondence, enough to hang every corrupt official from here to California." As the mine collapsed in a shower of sparks and smoke, Claire felt Nantan's arms around her, solid and real. They'd saved lives, secured evidence, but at the cost of a human life, even one as twisted as Pike's. "He chose his end," Nantan said quietly, reading her thoughts. "You gave him every chance." Harrison approached, his uniform singed, but his bearing still military precise. "Well done, Marshal Franklin, though I'd appreciate less dramatic rescues in future." "I'll do my best, Colonel." She looked at the rescued prisoners being tended by medics. "What now?" "And now we use what Marshal Hickok preserved to finish cleaning house. Edison's trial starts next month. With this evidence, he won't be the only one facing federal justice." As dawn broke over the desert, they made their way back to the temporary camp. Susan waited with healing herbs and that knowing smile that suggested she'd foreseen the night's outcome. "You walk through fire and come out stronger," she told Claire, applying a poultice to her aggravated shoulder wound. "The spirits mark you as special." "I don't feel special," Claire admitted. "I feel tired and sore and sad that even a man like Pike had to die." "That's what makes you special," Susan replied. "A heart that grieves even for enemies. But now, you rest. Tomorrow brings its own challenges." The next weeks passed in a blur of legal preparations. The documents Hickok had saved proved even more damning than Hope-detailed records of bribes, murders disguised as accidents, plans for territorial expansion through systematic poisoning of water sources. Claire found herself in the strange position of being both a key witness and a federal marshal maintaining order. She worked closely with Hickok, who, despite his ordeal, proved sharp and dedicated. "You know what's funny?" he told her one evening as they cataloged evidence. "Edison could have been rich legitimately. He had the capital, the connections, but he wanted an empire, not just wealth. Men like Edison always want more." Claire replied, "My father used to say the sickness of greed has no cure but justice." "Wise man." Hickok studied her. "Harrison tells me you're planning to stay on as marshal after this is done. You and your Apache husband." Claire smiled at the term. Though no formal ceremony had taken place, the Apache band had accepted their bond, and she wore Nantan's gift, a silver bracelet with turquoise stones, as proudly as any wedding ring. "Someone needs to stand between the Edisons of the world and the people they devour," she said. "Might as well be us." A commotion outside interrupted them. Thomas burst in, face grim. "Riders coming. Edison's men from the northern operations, maybe 40. They say they want to negotiate, but," he shook his head, "they're armed for war, not talk." Claire strapped on her gun belt. Here it was Edison's loyalists making a last desperate play. They'd known this was coming, but 40 men was a serious force. "Get word to Harrison," she told Thomas, "and ask Susan to prepare the healers. This could get ugly." The riders arrived at sunset, arranged in military formation. At their head rode Luther Grant Edison's former foreman, the man who'd helped kidnap Eli. He'd escaped capture after the inquiry, and now Claire understood why. He'd been gathering Edison's scattered forces. "Marshal Franklin," Grant called out, his voice carrying that false friendliness that masked threat. "We need to talk about the future." Claire stood at the camp's edge, very aware of the Apache warriors hidden in the rocks. Harrison's soldiers in defensive positions, and Nantan somewhere in the shadows with his rifle.
The future's already decided. Grant, Edison's going to prison. His empire's broken. Time to find new employment.
See, that's where you're wrong. Grant dismounted, keeping his hands visible but ready. Mister, Edison's got friends, powerful friends who don't like seeing a great man brought low by savages and turncoats. They've sent us to make an offer.
I'm listening. Leave. All of you. Take your Apache pets and disappear. In exchange, certain documents go missing. Certain witnesses have accidents.
And Mr. Edison's unfortunate legal troubles resolve themselves. Grant's smile was cold. Everyone wins. Everyone except justice. Claire replied, and the people Edison murdered. And the ones he planned to murder, no deal. Grant. I figured you'd say that. Grant's hand moved toward his gun. Principles make people predictable. And dead.
The gunfight erupted with shocking suddenness. Grant drew, fast as a snake, but Claire was faster. Her father's Colt spoke once, and Grant spun away, clutching his shoulder. Then the night exploded. 40 riders charged the camp while defenders opened fire from cover. But Harrison had prepared well-preset explosions, channeled the attackers into killing fields where soldiers and Apache warriors had clear shots. Claire found herself in the thick of it, badge gleaming in the muzzle flashes. She moved through the battle with desperate purpose, very aware that these attackers wouldn't take prisoners. A rider bore down on her. Saber raised. Before she could react, Nantan appeared from nowhere, pulling the man from his saddle in a move that spoke of his warrior training. They fought together, back to back, as the battle raged around them. Then she saw him, Grant, wounded but mobile, making for the supply tent where they'd stored the evidence awaiting transport to federal court. He had a torch in his good hand. No! Claire ran, knowing she was too far, too late.
An arrow sprouted from Grant's wrist, the torch tumbling harmlessly to the sand. Susan stood 30 feet away, bow in hand, looking every inch the warrior woman she'd been in youth.
Some skills,
she called out calmly.
You never forget.
The battle turned quickly after that, leaderless, facing determined resistance. Edison's men broke and fled. Those who couldn't ride away surrendered, throwing down weapons and begging for mercy they'd never have shown. As dawn broke over another battlefield, Claire surveyed the damage. 3 soldiers dead, 5 Apache wounded, including Thomas with a bullet through his leg, multiple injuries among Edison's forces, but they'd held. The evidence was safe. Justice would proceed. You all right? Nantan asked, checking her for wounds with gentle hands.
Yeah,
she leaned into him, exhausted.
Getting tired of being shot at, though.
Comes with the badge. Hickok limped up, supported by a soldier. But if it helps, this was likely the last gasp. With Grant captured and these men willing to testify to save their own necks, Edison's completely finished. Harrison appeared, uniform torn but spirit intact. Federal reinforcements are an hour out. We've won. Marshal Franklin. Truly won. But looking at the dead and wounded, Claire wondered what victory really meant. They'd stopped Edison, saved the water, forged new alliances between peoples. Yet the cost in blood seemed to stain everything. You grieve for the necessary, Susan said, appearing at her elbow with that uncanny ability to read thoughts. This too makes you a good leader. But remember, those men chose violence. You chose protection. The weight is not the same. As the sun climbed higher, the Apache began their mourning songs for all the dead, even their enemies. The soldiers, after initial surprise, stood respectfully. Some even removed their hats. Things really are changing, Hickok murmured. Claire watched Nantan directing the cleanup, Thomas joking despite his wound, Susan teaching a young soldier how to properly bandage injuries, Harrison and the Apache war chief discussing defensive strategies as equals.
Maybe, she said slowly, painfully, but maybe.
A month later, Claire stood in a federal courthouse in Tucson, watching Cyrus Edison face judgment. The man who'd seemed so powerful was diminished. His empire reduced to criminal charges that filled 3 pages: murder, conspiracy, corruption, attempted genocide. She testified for 6 hours, laying out the entire twisted story. Nantan testified too, the first Apache witness many in the court had ever seen speak as an equal. Hickok presented the salvaged documents with the dry precision of a natural lawman. Even Grant, hoping for leniency, revealed the full scope of Edison's plans. The verdict was never in doubt. Guilty on all counts, life in federal prison. As they led Edison away, he looked at Claire with eyes that burned with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won? Progress can't be stopped. Your savage paradise will be swept away by civilization." "Maybe," Claire replied calmly. "But not by you, and not by poison. And maybe, if we're very lucky and very careful, progress and preservation can find a balance." He spat at her feet. The marshals dragged him away, still cursing, and Claire felt a chapter of her life close with the courtroom doors. Outside, Tucson blazed under desert sun. Nantan waited by their horses. Now wearing his own marshal's badge, Harrison had pushed through his appointment as the first Apache federal marshal, arguing that law enforcement needed to reflect the population it served. "So," he said, helping her mount, "what now? Marshal Franklin." "Now, Marshal Nantan." She grinned at using his Apache name officially. "We do the real work, building something better from the ashes Edison left behind." They rode out together, badges glinting, heading back to Coyote Springs, where Susan was teaching integrated classes of Apache and settler children, where Dolores Valdez had finally received the medicine she needed, where water ran free and clear for all who thirsted. It wasn't a perfect ending. Perfect didn't exist in the real world, but it was just, and sometimes justice was enough to build a future on. "I love you," Claire said suddenly, surprising herself with a simple declaration after all their dramatic moments. Nantan reached over to take her hand. "And I love you, Guyen, today, tomorrow, and all the days water flows from stone." Behind them, Tucson faded into memory. Ahead, the desert stretched endless and full of possibility. And somewhere between past and future, 2 souls rode together, badges and hearts aligned in purpose. The real work was just beginning. Dawn broke over the desert like a promise written in gold and crimson. Claire rode hard through the twisted valleys, her mare Victoria lathered with sweat, Nantan keeping pace beside her on his painted Mustang. Behind them, the dust cloud of their pursuers grew larger, Edison's last loyalists. Desperate men with nothing left to lose. "There," Nantan pointed to a narrow canyon mouth ahead. "We can lose them in the rocks." But Claire knew better. She'd studied Rooker's maps, learned every hidden trail and secret passage. "No, that leads to a box canyon. They're herding us." She pulled Victoria sharply left, taking a barely visible deer trail up the slope. Nantan followed without question, their partnership now instinctive after months of shared dangers. Rifle fire cracked behind them, bullets whining off stones. They crested the ridge as the sun climbed higher. And there it was, Coyote Springs, spreading like an emerald jewel in the harsh landscape. But between them and safety lay 2 miles of open ground. "We'll never make it," Nantan said, calculating distances with a warrior's eye. Claire's mind raced. Then she smiled, remembering her father's old surveying tricks. "Yes, we will. Follow me, and when I signal, make as much dust as you can." They plunged down the far slope at an angle, using the morning sun to blind their pursuers. At Claire's sharp whistle, both riders zigzagged wildly, their horses' hooves raising a dust screen in the dry earth. Shots rang out, but firing accurately into the sun through swirling dust was near impossible. A rifle bullet buzzed past Claire's ear like an angry wasp. Another tugged at her sleeve. Then they were among the cottonwoods.
the springs sacred groves offering shelter. Apache warriors materialized from concealment, bows drawn, rifles ready. Thomas limped forward, his legs still healing from the battle at the mine. "About time you got here. Grandmother's been worried." "Edison's men?" Nantan asked, swinging down from his horse. "Let them come." Thomas grinned wolfishly. "They'll find the Apache have long memories and excellent aim." But the pursuers had apparently thought better of attacking a fortified position. The dust cloud reversed course, fading back into the desert. Claire felt her shoulders drop with released tension. "It's not over," she said quietly. "They'll try again. Edison has too many friends, even from prison. Then we'll be ready." Susan's voice carried from the largest lodge. "Come, we have much to discuss." Inside, Claire found an unexpected gathering. Dolores Valdez sat with Marshal Hickok, while her niece Rosa poured coffee. Eli was there too, finally healthy enough to travel, along with several Apache elders and, surprisingly, Colonel Harrison in civilian clothes. Marshal Franklin, Marshal Nantan. Harrison nodded formally. "We have a situation." Claire accepted coffee gratefully, noting the worry lines creasing Harrison's face. "What kind of situation?" "Edison's lawyers have filed appeals. They're claiming the trial was biased, that evidence was fabricated, that Apache testimony should be inadmissible." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Worse, there's a new federal judge coming from Washington. William Taft Ambitious, politically connected, and very interested in bringing civilization to the territories." "Meaning he's already bought," Hickok said bluntly. "We don't know that," Harrison cautioned, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But Edison's people have definitely been spreading gold around Washington. They're painting this whole affair as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by hysterical locals and savage influences." Claire felt anger rise like bile. After everything, the deaths, the evidence, the confessions, they were trying to rewrite history with golden ink. "So we fight," she said. "Again." "How?" Dolores asked practically. "You can't shoot legal proceedings." "No," Susan interjected. "But you can drown lies with truth. I have been thinking." She produced a leather portfolio. "These are the old treaties, the original water agreements between my people and yours. Never honored, but never legally dissolved." Harrison leaned forward. "Go on. If the federal government wishes to bring civilization, let them honor civilized agreements. We petition not just for Edison's continued imprisonment, but for formal recognition of Apache water rights. Make this bigger than one man's crimes." It was brilliant. By expanding the scope, they'd force Washington to address systemic issues rather than just Edison's individual corruption. But Claire saw the danger too. "They'll fight harder if we threaten the whole system," she warned. "Then we fight harder too," Nantan said simply. "The alternative is watching them erase everything we've accomplished." Over the next days, they prepared their campaign like a military operation. Hickok and Harrison worked the legal angles, drafting petitions and gathering precedents. The Apache elders provided oral histories and documentation going back generations. Dolores used her connections to rally local support, while Rosa proved surprisingly adept at organizing information. Claire found herself at the center of it all, coordinating between worlds with her federal marshal's authority. But the weight of it pressed down so many people depending on her, on them, to hold the line against injustice. One evening, as she sat by the spring trying to organize her thoughts, Eli joined her. Her brother had grown during his ordeal, the soft boy replaced by someone harder but not bitter. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for coming after me, for believing in me. You're my brother. What else would I do? Edison offered me a fortune to testify that you and Nantan coerced me, that I was a willing participant until you forced me to lie." Eli's laugh was hollow. "Even promised to make the charges against me disappear." Claire's blood chilled. "Eli? I told his lawyers to go to hell." Her brother's voice grew firm. "I've seen what selling your soul costs. Rather hang with honor than live with that shame." She hugged him fiercely, feeling tears threaten. "Dad would be proud." "Of both of us," Eli replied. "You know Edison's people aren't done. They'll come at us every way they can." As if to prove his point, riders appeared at the spring's edge the next morning. But these weren't gunmen. They were lawyers and officials, led by a man whose expensive suit looked absurd in the desert setting. "I'm looking for Marshal Franklin," he announced with Eastern superiority. "You found her." Claire stepped forward, very aware of her trail clothes and the colt on her hip compared to his city finery. "Josiah Carnegie, special prosecutor from Washington." He didn't offer his hand. "I'm here to investigate irregularities in the Edison trial." "What irregularities?" Harrison demanded, joining them. Carnegie smiled thinly. "The use of coerced testimony, the admission of inadmissible evidence, the clear bias of local authorities who had personal vendettas against Mr. Edison." "Every word of testimony was truthful," Claire stated flatly. "Truth is a matter of legal interpretation, Marshal, as you'll learn." Carnegie's eyes flicked dismissively over the gathered Apache. "I'll also be investigating whether federal badges were appropriately issued. The standards for such positions are quite specific." The threat was clear. They weren't just after Edison's freedom, but Claire and Nantan's authority. Strip them of their badges, and their protection disappeared. "Investigate all you like," Claire said calmly. "We have nothing to hide." "We'll see." Carnegie turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Marshal, I'd be very careful about any frontier justice incidents while I'm reviewing your case. Very careful indeed." After he left, the camp erupted in angry discussion. Some Apache wanted to simply run Carnegie off. Others counseled patience. Hickok suggested they needed their own legal representation fast. "I know someone," Harrison said slowly. "Charles Hamilton, best lawyer west of the Mississippi, and he owes me favors, but he's expensive." "I'll cover it," Dolores announced. Everyone turned to stare. She smiled sadly. "My husband left more than memories. He left gold hidden from men like Edison. Time to put it to good use." As they planned their legal defense, word came that made Claire's heart sink. The new Judge Taft had arrived in Tucson and immediately begun reviewing Edison's case. Worse, he'd issued an injunction preventing any federal marshal from acting against Edison's remaining business interests pending review. "He's protecting them while they regroup," Nantan said grimly. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She walked to the springs, finding Susan sitting by the water despite the late hour. "You carry the world like a sack of stones," the old woman observed. "It will break your back if you're not careful." "How do I put it down? People are depending on us." "By remembering you're not alone, by trusting others to help carry the load." Susan patted the ground beside her. "Sit. Let an old woman tell you a story." Claire settled beside her as Susan began. "Long ago, a young woman tried to carry water for her entire village in one pot. She struggled and strained, but always spilled more than she saved. Finally, an elder told her better 10 people carry 10 small pots than one person carry an impossible load. But I'm the marshal. It's my responsibility. You're a marshal, one of many who seek justice. Trust your allies. Claire, trust your husband. Trust the truth itself to find a way." As if summoned by her words, Nantan appeared from the darkness. "Can't sleep either." "Too much thinking," Claire admitted. He sat on her other side, and for a moment they simply existed, 3 people by eternal springs under eternal stars. Then Susan rose, patting both their shoulders. "Tomorrow brings its own battles. Tonight, remember why you fight." She walked away, leaving them alone. "She's right," Nantan said softly. "We've been reacting, defending. Time to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "Carnegie wants to investigate. Let him. But while he's looking at us, we investigate him and Judge Taft and every connection between them and Edison's money. Claire felt a spark of hope. Turn their weapons against them? Exactly. Rooker still has contacts in interesting places. Dolores knows everyone's secrets. And the Apache? He smiled. We've been watching without being seen for generations. They spent the remaining night hours planning, and by dawn, their counteroffensive was ready. While Carnegie conducted his official investigation, their own network went to work. Rosa proved invaluable. Using her innocent appearance to gather gossip in Tucson, she discovered Carnegie had substantial debts from failed investments debts that had mysteriously vanished just before he took this assignment. Rooker, through old Army contacts, learned Judge Taft's appointment had been pushed through by senators who'd received substantial campaign contributions from Edison's holding companies. The Apache scouts tracked Carnegie's movements, noting his secret meetings with Edison's lawyers, always in places they thought unobserved. We need one more piece, Hickok said as they reviewed the gathered intelligence. Something that ties it all together inescapably. That piece came from an unexpected source. Luther Grant, Edison's former foreman, asked to speak with Claire from his cell in Fort Grant, still healing from wounds suffered in the battle. He'd had time to think. I'm done being Edison's fool, he said without preamble. Man threw me away like a broken tool once I got caught. What are you offering? Claire asked carefully. Letters, Edison's private correspondence with Carnegie and others. Had them as insurance, hidden at my ranch. His laugh was bitter. Guess it's time to cash that policy. The letters were damning. Edison discussing how to handle the territorial situation. Carnegie promising favorable outcomes for appropriate compensation. Even Taft expressing sympathy for Edison's persecution by radical elements. Charles Hamilton, the lawyer Harrison had summoned, reviewed everything with growing excitement. This is it. This proves conspiracy to obstruct justice. But we need to be strategic about revealing it. They waited until Carnegie announced a public hearing to present his findings against Claire and Nantan. The Tucson courthouse was packed Edison supporters expecting vindication, locals hoping for justice, journalists scenting scandal. Carnegie presented his case with smooth confidence, painting Claire as a vindictive woman driven by emotion, Nantan as a savage inappropriately given authority, their entire investigation as a travesty of proper procedure. Then Hamilton rose for the defense. What followed was legal surgery, point by point. Hamilton dismantled Carnegie's arguments. He presented witness after witness soldiers who'd served with Harrison, Apache elders speaking through translators, even reformed criminals like Rooker who testified to Edison's systematic corruption. When Carnegie tried to object to Apache testimony, Hamilton produced precedent after precedent, establishing their rights under federal treaty. When he questioned Claire's qualifications, Hamilton listed her successful investigations, her bravery under fire, her dedication to justice regardless of race or status. But the killing blow came when Hamilton introduced Grant's letters. The courtroom erupted as he read Edison's own words, discussing bribes and manipulation as casually as weather. Carnegie went white. Where did you obtain these? They're clearly fabricated. From Luther Grant, Hamilton said smoothly. Who is prepared to testify to their authenticity? Unless, of course, Mr. Carnegie would prefer to explain why his signature appears on several receipts for payments from Edison's accounts. Judge Taft gavelled desperately for order, but the damage was done. Journalists were already racing for the telegraph office. Carnegie slumped in his chair, seeing his career evaporate. Your Honor, Hamilton continued relentlessly. I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Marshals Franklin and Nantan. I further move for investigation of Mr. Carnegie for corruption and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Taft had no choice. The evidence was too public, too damning. He dismissed Carnegie's charges and, reading the room's mood, announced he would recuse himself from all matters related to the Edison case. As they left the courthouse, Claire felt like she could breathe for the first time in weeks. They'd won again. But she knew it wasn't over. Edison still had appeals pending, still had friends in high places. "One battle at a time," Nantan said, reading her thoughts. "Today, we celebrate. Tomorrow, we continue fighting." That evening, Coyote Springs hosted a victory gathering. Apache and settlers mingled freely, sharing food and stories. Dolores, despite her continuing illness, danced with Hickok. Rosa and Eli talked quietly by the fire, making Claire wonder about future possibilities. Even Harrison relaxed enough to try Susan's traditional Apache stew. As Claire stood watching it all, she felt her father's presence. This is what he'd dreamed of, different peoples united by shared purpose, protecting the land and each other. "She resisted the Apache's embrace by night," Nantan murmured in her ear, "yet woke at dawn craving his touch." Claire turned in his arms, smiling at the callback to their early days. "Not resisting anymore." "No," he agreed, pulling her closer. "Now you're embracing everything Apache ways, federal law, the hard path between worlds." "We're embracing," she corrected. "Together." They danced then, marshals' badges glinting in firelight, while around them their communities celebrated a victory that was really just another beginning. The water sang its eternal song. The stars wrote their stories. And two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds held tight to love and justice in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Edison's influence wasn't dead, just wounded. The fight for water rights, for mutual respect between peoples, for the soul of the territory would continue. But tonight, there was joy. And in the high desert of Arizona, under the watchful eyes of ancestors and allies, that was more than enough. It was everything. The courthouse in Calico Wells had never seen such a gathering. Apache elders in traditional dress sat beside ranchers in dusty boots. Mexican families mingled with former soldiers. At the center of it all, Judge Benjamin Franklin Morse, newly appointed to replace the disgraced Taft, called for order. "We're here to ratify the Coyote Springs Water Compact," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of history. "A binding agreement between the United States government, the Apache Nation, and all residents of the territory regarding water rights and usage." Claire Franklin stood at the witness table, her marshal's badge polished bright. Nantan beside her in his own federal uniform. Across from them, Edison's lawyers made one last attempt to derail justice. "Your Honor," the lead attorney protested, "my client cannot agree to terms while wrongfully imprisoned." "Your client," Judge Morse interrupted coldly, "is serving a life sentence for attempted mass murder. His agreement is neither required nor desired. Proceed, Marshal Franklin." Claire rose, holding the document that represented months of negotiation. "The Coyote Springs Compact establishes water as a shared resource, held in trust for all people regardless of race or origin. No single entity may claim exclusive rights. Usage will be managed jointly by federal authorities and Apache representatives." She read the key provisions: protection of sacred sites, sustainable usage limits, severe penalties for contamination. It was everything her father had dreamed of, law that recognized both progress and preservation. "Furthermore," Claire continued, "all of Edison's former holdings will be distributed among those he wronged. The Apache Nation receives full federal recognition of their ancestral lands. Settlers who lost property to Edison's schemes will be compensated from his seized assets." An elderly Apache man stood Joseph, one of Susan's cousins, his dignity unmistakable despite his worn clothing. "For generations, we have watched men like Edison poison the earth for gold. Today, we see justice, not perfect, but real. The NDE people accept these terms." One by one, representatives stood to voice agreement. Dolores Valdez, still fighting her illness but determined to see this through. Theodore Rooker, reformed and remarkably sober. Even Luther Grant, brought from prison to testify, added his support in exchange for a reduced sentence. But as Judge Morse raised his gavel to make it official, the courthouse doors burst open. A young man in an expensive suit strode in. followed by armed federal marshals from Washington. "Alexander Hamilton Colfax, special envoy from the president," he announced. "I'm here to halt these proceedings pending federal review." Claire's heart sank. They'd been so close. "On what grounds?" Judge Morse demanded. "Questions have been raised about the legitimacy of certain testimonies, particularly regarding the Apache witnesses and the irregular nature of Marshal Franklin's appointment." Irregular, Nantan stood, controlled fury in every line. "Because she's a woman, or because she stands with Apache?" "Because she has a personal stake in the outcome." Colfax replied smoothly. "Her relationship with you, Marshal Nantan, creates clear conflict of interest." The courtroom erupted. It took several minutes for order to be restored. When quiet returned, Claire felt the weight of all their work hanging by a thread. Then Eli stood up from the gallery. Her brother, who'd grown so much since his ordeal, faced the special envoy without flinching. "Mr. Colfax, I'm Eli Franklin, the man Edison framed for train robbery, the one he imprisoned and tortured for information." His voice grew stronger. "If anyone has a conflict of interest, it's me. Yet I support this compact, because justice isn't about personal feeling, it's about truth." "Pretty words," Colfax began. "I'm not finished," Eli interrupted. "You question Apache testimony. These people saved my life. They showed more honor than any businessman I've met." "You question my sister's integrity. She gave up everything to find truth. Nearly died multiple times. If that's not qualification for a marshal's badge, what is?" Rosa Valdez stood next. "You want to talk about conflicts of interest? How much did Edison's friends pay for this intervention?" "That's a serious accusation," Colfax warned. "Then let's be serious," Marshal Hickok drawled, rising slowly. "I've been investigating you, Colfax. Interesting how your debts vanished right before this assignment, just like Carnegie's did." Colfax paled as Hickok produced documents, the special envoy's financial records, showing large deposits from anonymous sources. "Your Honor," Hickok continued, "I'd like to present evidence that Mr. Colfax is attempting to obstruct justice for financial gain." What followed was devastating. Witness after witness presented evidence of the conspiracy's reach. Senators bought, officials corrupted, a web of greed stretching to the Capitol. But more powerful than the corruption was the unity against it. Apache warriors testified alongside cavalry soldiers they'd once fought. Mexican families stood with Anglo ranchers. Former enemies united by water and justice. Susan took the stand last, age and wisdom radiating from every word. Thomas translated as she spoke. "I have lived through war and peace, abundance and drought. I have seen the worst men can do to each other. But I have also seen this," she gestured to the packed courtroom. "Enemies becoming allies, strangers becoming family. This is what water teaches us. It flows around obstacles, wears down the hardest stone, finds a way to nurture life. The compact we signed today is like water. It will find its way despite those who would dam it for their own use." When she finished, the silence was profound. Even Colfax seemed affected, his prepared objections dying unspoken. Judge Morse gavelled once. "Mr. Colfax, you have two choices. Withdraw your intervention and face investigation for corruption, or proceed, and I'll have you arrested immediately for obstruction of justice. Choose." Colfax looked around the room at the united faces, the presented evidence, the marshals ready to enforce the law. His shoulders slumped. "I withdraw federal objection to these proceedings." The cheer that erupted shook the courthouse rafters. Judge Morse had to gavel repeatedly before continuing. "The Coyote Springs Water Compact is hereby ratified and entered into federal law. May God have mercy on anyone who violates it." As people celebrated, Claire found herself overwhelmed with emotion. They'd done it, really, truly done it. The water would flow free, protected by law and community. Nantan's arms wrapped around her from behind. Your father would be proud. Our fathers, she corrected, thinking of all the ancestors who'd fought for this moment. The celebration moved to the street, spilling into Dolores's boarding house, where tables groaned with food representing all the territory's cultures. Music filled the air, Apache drums, Mexican guitars, settler fiddles finding unexpected harmony. Colonel Harrison, retired but still military straight, raised a glass. To the marshals who showed us law can serve justice, not just power. To the Apache who taught us water's true value, someone else called. To the fallen who died for this day, Claire added quietly, thinking of her father, of those lost in the conflict. To the future, Nantan concluded, where different peoples share rather than steal. They drank, and Claire noticed Eli and Rosa dancing, lost in each other's eyes, young love blooming from the ashes of conflict. It seemed fitting. As night fell, Claire and Nantan walked to her father's grave on the hill overlooking the town. She placed the signed compact on the headstone. "We did it. Dad, water runs free. Justice found its way." Wind stirred the papers, and for a moment Claire could swear she heard her father's voice. "I knew you would. Claire Bear, I always knew." They stood in comfortable silence until Susan appeared, moving with surprising quiet for her age. "It is time," she said simply. "Time," Claire asked. "For the ceremony you have postponed. You wear his bracelet. He wears your trust. But the people should witness what the heart has already decided." Claire looked at Nantan, seeing her own realization mirrored. They'd been so focused on the fight, they'd never formalized what everyone already knew. "A wedding," she said. "A binding," Susan corrected. "Apache and white traditions woven together, like your lives." 3 days later, as dawn painted Coyote Springs in shades of rose and gold, Claire stood beside the sacred water. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered with Apache beadwork, her marshal's badge pinned over her heart. Nantan waited in traditional dress combined with his federal uniform, the mixing of worlds made manifest. Judge Morse officiated the legal ceremony while Susan performed the Apache rituals. The crowd included everyone their journey had touched. Dolores coughing but determined to attend, Hickok standing as witness, Harrison in full dress uniform, Rosa as maid of honor with Eli as best man. "Do you, Claire Franklin, take this man as husband, partner, and equal?" Morse asked. "I do," Claire said firmly. "In law and in life, in justice and in joy." "Do you, Samuel Nantan, take this woman as wife, partner, and equal?" "I do," Nantan replied. "In tradition and in change, in struggle and in peace." Susan stepped forward with a blanket woven with symbols from both cultures. "In the Apache way, two become one while remaining themselves. This blanket represents the protection you offer each other and the warmth you create together." She wrapped it around their shoulders as they faced each other. "Now speak your hearts," Susan instructed. Claire took Nantan's hands. "You saved my life in that first canyon. But more than that, you saved my spirit. You showed me that strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. I promise to walk beside you between all worlds, to honor both our peoples, to choose love over fear every day we draw breath." Nantan's eyes were bright. "You crashed into my world like a flash flood, washing away everything I thought I knew about boundaries and belonging. You showed me that courage means fighting for others, not just against enemies. I promise to support your dreams, to share your battles, to build a future where our children will know both their heritages with pride." Then by federal law and Apache tradition, Judge Morse declared, "You are bound as one. What water has joined, let no drought divide." Their kiss was brief but intense, mindful of the crowd but unable to completely hide their joy. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, the sun crested the ridge, bathing everything in light. The celebration lasted all day. Stories were shared, Dances taught across cultures, bonds strengthened, even word of Edison's death in prison, a heart attack. The telegram said couldn't dampen spirits. His shadow had passed. Their light remained. That evening, as Claire and Nantan finally found a moment alone by the springs, she reflected on the journey that brought them here. "Remember that first night?" she asked. "When you warned me about the canyon." "You were so suspicious," he recalled. "Hand never leaving your gun." "She resisted the Apache's embrace by night," Claire quoted softly, "yet woke at dawn craving his touch." "Still true?" he asked, pulling her closer. "More each day," she admitted, "though now I don't resist at all." They watched the stars emerge, the eternal lights that had witnessed so much conflict and resolution, hatred and love, the slow bend of justice's arc. "What now?" Nantan asked. "We've won the fight we started. What comes next?" Claire considered. "There'll be other Edisons, other fights. The compact is just paper unless people enforce it." "Then we enforce it, train others to enforce it, build something that lasts beyond us." "A legacy," Claire agreed. "For your grandmother's people, for my father's memory, for the children Rosa and Eli will probably have." "Our children, too," Nantan added quietly. "Someday." Claire smiled, imagining little ones running free between worlds, speaking both languages, knowing both traditions. "I'd like that." A shooting star blazed across the sky, and Claire made a wish not for herself, but for the territory, for all the people learning to live as neighbors, for water that would always run clean and free. "Home," she said simply. "Home," Nantan agreed. And there beneath the desert stars, beside the springs that had seen so much history made and remade, two federal marshals who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances held each other close. The future stretched before them, uncertain but bright with possibility. Justice had been served. Love had triumphed. Water flowed eternal and free. In the high desert of Arizona Territory, that was miracle enough for any lifetime. But their story, the story of all who'd fought for this moment, would flow on like the springs themselves, clear, pure, and powerful enough to carve new channels through the hardest stone. The beginning was also a promise where different waters meet. New rivers are born. And somewhere in the mingling of those waters, in the joining of those streams, hope ran deeper than any drought could ever reach. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love and justice in the Old West. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Claire and Nantan's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this story of courage, love, and the fight for justice. Until next time, partners keep riding true.